Hola, everybody.
Hola? Sound like me
Hola.
trying to speak Spanish.
Did you know that hola? You don't even know what hola means.
Well, it
You will never
depends.
be able to. You will. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, is it the like rockola or
Just hola. You don't
hola?
know what hola means.
I know what hola means.
No, you don't know what it means.
It means hello. Hola, muchacho.
Yeah, it is true, but
Mhm.
the reason I'm even bringing that and I brought it is because I hola
Mhm.
is also like a wave, which makes sense actually, but like a ocean wave.
Okay.
And now saying it out loud, it's making sense right now to me because there's a place called Las Olas, but it
Mhm.
doesn't mean the hellos. It means the waves. And you're saying, wait,
Okay.
is it spelled the same way?
Probably not. I mean, hola is HOLA.
HOLA, right? Wait a second. How do you say
It's
waves in Spanish?
it's a homophone.
No, but they're. You know what? Let's continue on because I thought no. Wait, Las Olas is not with an H. You're right. Okay, so Ola. All right, forget that. It's phonetic.
Yeah, it's a homophone.
Yeah, it
It's
was
like
a phonetic.
red. Which red do you mean?
It's the same. Yeah,
The
at
color or
least.
the past tense of read?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I
Mhm.
just realized that now, which is
That's
a good,
cool.
which is a good start off point because tonight we're going heavy duty into the English language and its variations.
I'm up for it.
Well,
Fact,
if anything, throw. I didn't intend for that. I just
no,
threw that
no,
out,
no, no,
joking
no.
out.
But in a joking way, but it's seriousness, the truth. I watched a video a couple of days ago. Have you ever heard of the Shavian alphabet?
The who?
Shavian alphabet.
No.
It is for English, and it was actually commissioned. Somebody researched and did it. It was an alphabet that was created by George Bernard Shaw, and it was supposed to be. He thought the English alphabet and the English language were ridiculous because he was a writer. He wanted to shorten everything up, but he didn't want to do everything in shorthand. He wanted an alphabet that would cover every phonetic sound with one letter. So he commissioned him. He kind of put out the challenge there, and one guy said, "Yeah, I can do it." And it turns out you'd need 48 characters to create every sound with one letter, with one character. So the TH, like in breath, that's one character. The TH, like in these, those, that's another character. The double O in book or look is one character. The double O in fool or loon is another character. I mean, but it's weird as hell. It looks like something from outer space. And it's 48 characters. There's no way I'd remember them all.
Well, Tolkien, the one that wrote Lord of the Rings and
Mhm.
The Hobbit and just all that and the appendices and all that stuff, wrote his own uh, language for the series.
Mhm.
He delved in so much. Talk about taking side roads that we did last week.
Mhm.
Tolkien was doing that with his creation, and it ended up being this like literal. He created a whole universe that people later drew from, and including languages like Elvish and whatnot. And due to that, people eventually got to things such as Dungeons and Dragons, role playing, and such.
Oh yeah.
And they used his criteria as the basis for his for the game.
It's it's weird how some things like that can take off, and because you never know what's going to do it, how something like that can take off and basically be the basis for so much that follows after it that you might not think is related, but once they once they nail it down, Tolkien's language and the atmosphere surrounding it, that whole universe can just explode, and so much is based on the groundwork that he laid. It's kind of like Asimov with science fiction. So much of science fiction as we know it was based on what he basically did, laid the groundwork for. I mean,
Yeah,
and it's strange that it can take off like that.
yeah. It takes on a life of its own, even unbeknownst to the person that
Hmm.
started it off.
Right. Because there are certain things within those, the science fiction fantasy realm that we just kind of take for granted. This is how it's supposed to go. It doesn't matter what the story is, but there are certain things that we accept as this is how science fiction is done. But it took somebody to lay that groundwork, you know?
Yeah, yeah. The idea gets rolled down the time warp,
Hmm.
and others pick up on it and add to it,
Yeah.
and then it starts getting like the Marvel universe or
Hmm.
DC universe, and stuff like that, and it they create these whole experiences for people that they utilize in role playing and all this, and it's one of the baked in features. I've been using baked in because I like it. It it sounds like a Pandera place where
Yeah.
you bypass pastries and such, and at the
Oh,
same
yeah.
time you can mix it. Um, it's a feature of the 20th century,
Hmm.
the role playing game part.
Yeah.
Although there was likely all sorts of types of role playing games in times past, but this whole
Sure.
from Tolkien on forward, the D&D and whatnot was really a thing that I relate to because of, well, growing up with it. To be honest,
Sure.
I don't know that
Sure.
you did that.
No, I didn't. I was in my 20s in the army and was on to other things by the time that really got popular, or at least popular here in the Rogue Valley. And it was just starting to come in when I left, basically. So I didn't get involved in any of it. I was out of school and all that other good stuff. So I was trying to be an adult, trying, semi succeeding, not
I don't
really
know how
much
many other
though.
kids did it,
Hmm.
but I know in the '80s, because it wasn't a '70s thing; it was an '80s thing,
Definitely.
as far as I know. But I know at school one day in elementary school, a kid brought a big thick book
Hmm.
with drawings on the front, and that I asked, "Hey, what's that?" This is Dungeons and Dragons, and he explained a little bit, and he opened the book, and the pages had charts and whatnot.
Hmm.
I said, "Oh, can I borrow it?" And he says, "Yeah, sure." I never returned it ever. He never asked for it for some reason. We were kids, so it probably left his mind, and he left it at who knows what the story. But I ended up with the book in my possession,
Hmm.
and it was a time after that I called my friends to unite from across the different parts of Sweetwater,
Hmm.
converging in my room one day. My mother in the kitchen talking on the phone, drinking coffee, smoking a cigarette. My dad either listening to the radio or somewhere working, probably on the week. And we all gathered in my room and we began to write out. I became the dungeon master, which means I'm the guy that tells the story.
Hmm.
And they became the characters. One a barbarian, the other one a magician mage. The other one was some sort of elf, this or that, and we began our journey and had dice and we played, and that lasted for years, dude. We would go through adventures in our room, um, in my room, I'm sorry, and others. We sometimes we go, hey, let's go to Ernie's house. We'll play there, and we'd all go over there and we begin our journey. And I don't know what our parents. They never really bothered us, but it must have been weird, or who knows what they thought. We were sitting. If they'd open the door to our bedroom, they'd see three, four guys, kids sitting around
Hmm.
with notepads and dice. It looked almost. It could be like some 1920s. Gambino family gambling ring for all they knew, and they'd see that, but at least it wasn't
Well,
like.
they knew where you were. They
But the
didn't have to
idea
worry
must
about you out there breaking somebody's window playing baseball or something like that, you know.
it must have looked, because why aren't you kids, you know, going doing something dangerous, like probably a side thought.
Yeah, why aren't you outside?
You're all sitting coalesced there, you know, and we were, and sometimes we'd make explosions because we'd imitate what was happening, a dragon or such, and this, that was a feature of the '80s, and we were very much a part of that.
Yeah, see, we didn't really have anything like that that I'm aware of. I mean, the closest we had to that was just listening to albums. You know, somebody buy a new album. Dude, I got this. You want to go listen? Yeah, let's go check it out. We'd five of us ride our bikes over to their house and we'd listen to the album. That was about it. We didn't
Well,
sit
we did
around
that.
and watch movies together or anything like that. It was just basically if it wasn't anything like that, we were out doing something. We're down at the bowling alley playing pinball machines, or we're out riding our bikes doing whatever.
Well, we did
Figuring
all
out
that other
something.
stuff.
Yeah.
We did that. We played at the arcade.
Hmm.
We went bike riding. We did all the other stuff, but we had
Hmm.
this extra feature
Hmm.
that probably wasn't included in the '70s, due to the advent of the role playing stuff. So we did do all the other stuff.
Hmm.
We'd go to the mall. We'd go to the record store. I mean, just all the stuff. But
Yeah.
we were introduced to this feature that did occupy a lot of our time, to be honest with you. And if you look at like that brand new series from a year or two ago that's called Stranger Things,
Yeah.
we were basically a snapshot of those kids. And any movie that you look at from the '80s where kids are involved, like The Goonies
Yeah.
or so on, that was basically us.
Yep.
Not really, but I can look at it and say, oh yeah, that matches us perfectly in terms of the general sense of that's us placed in that era of
Hmm.
that time, which is a very special thing to do. What would have been the equivalent in the '70s?
You remember that movie Stand By Me?
Yeah,
The kids off to go see a dead body.
yeah,
That's close. Not 100%, obviously, but it was always something like that. It was always going somewhere or going to do something like
yeah.
that. I remember we took one trip, me and a friend just jumped on our bikes, and it was probably 10 miles anyway. We went down to the drag strip to, it was Fremont, California, Fremont drag strip. And the races weren't happening at all.
For
And
people 500 years from now, drag strip is a place where where vehicles
yeah,
just
where they raced a quarter mile straight.
not the other variation that might take hold in the future.
No.
Go ahead.
And this is security in the 1970s. There were two poles across the road and a chain that drooped, almost touched the ground, where we could ride up to it, lift our bikes over the chain, hop on, and then just go right into the drag strip. And him and I raced down the drag strip, him on one lane, me on the other lane. Of course, we were about half worn out by the time we got to the end of the quarter mile. There was nobody there, but we could tell people that we raced on the drag strip. You know, they didn't have to know we were on our bikes. Just goofy things like that, just to see how fast we could go. Of course, none of the timing equipment was turned on, none of that stuff. But when you're 13, you don't care.
Yeah, you're
Just
having a good old time.
yeah, just to go and do it. And then we had to ride all the way home. Going there was no problem. We could take our time, but we knew we had to get home. That was a pain. you know?
You know that Sweetwater has ancient hieroglyphs that no one talks about, but
No,
they exist.
nope,
Like,
didn't know it.
okay, so I discovered this a few. Wait till you hear this one. I discovered this a few months ago when I started the walking and exercising.
Mhm.
But in particular, when I went walking one day with my dog, and every time I pass by there, I see it again,
Mhm.
and I reminisce and stuff. In the '80s, a lot of these sidewalks that we have here did not exist. It's hard to imagine now because they've been there for so long by this point, but at some point they were laid fresh.
Mhm.
And such is the case with our sidewalk in front of my house. We had no sidewalk.
Yeah.
None of this was paved.
Mhm.
Me growing up. Well, actually, that's not 100. Well, no, that's actually true. I was going to say even in front, nowhere. I mean, there were paved in the main streets, but other than that,
Yeah.
walk through the grass and get to your into your house, um, or onto your porch. Well, I just a block away, where all my friends used to hang out and be at, and I'd go over and whatnot. Didn't know it at the time, but when they laid down that asphalt or that cement on their side of the street, there went all the kids and engraved like Hollywood Walk of Fame. And when I walked, I read it. One said Jeff was here, 1984.
Mhm.
The older friend Jeff, which we all looked at like whoa, and all the other kids.
Mhm.
And then as you keep going, Ozzy Osbourne in the letter patterns that Ozzy,
Mhm.
Motley Crue, all the stuff that's been sitting there for decades, and one of them's the one that says was here.
Mhm.
He literally, when he penned that onto that wet
Mhm.
cement, it was probably, I don't know this, but it was probably oh, I'm gonna do it and screw it and here and there it goes,
Mhm.
with the assumption that it'll just stay there. But 30 years out to see that there,
Mhm.
boy, was that simple moment of a kid going out there and just drawing on the thing
Uh-huh.
did create a 30-year long mark that was there at that time hanging out with those people. And you know why I never did it when
Mm.
they laid the cement? You know why?
Huh.
Even back then, because that was evidence.
Yeah, because no, dad'd kill me. Because there's my name. How can I deny it?
Exactly. And so I actually qualified it back then because I had various opportunities to do so. But what if the authorities come by and they see, oh, so you're the kid that did it. You're going 50 years, son. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I never
Yeah.
did. But these kids could give a flip and they straight up did it. And to this day, it's sitting there. So those are our Sweetwater hieroglyphs.
The closest thing I have to that, the closest thing I have to that was a friend, the same friend and I, riding riding our bikes. It was about maybe 2 miles from the house, and we come around this corner on the street, and we whip into this gas station to cut the corner. And you have an entrance over here on this road and an entrance over here on this road. Well, we were going to cut through the gas station to cut that corner and then head on down the road. Got about 2/3 of the way through that gas station parking lot, that lot, and I'm looking around, and damn, this asphalt's brand new and there ain't no cars on it. About that time, we heard a bunch of guys yelling. Turn around and look, and the whole construction crew was waving its arms. And I look back, and there's our bike tracks, our two bike tracks, through their
That's hilarious.
freshly laid coating. They were
You,
recoating the asphalt.
dude, that I've well,
Didn't know it at the time, didn't realize it at the time. We were about 2/3 of the way through. Then it was, oh crap, pedal our butts off to get away from there. We didn't want them catching us. I mean, they were big construction dudes, and we're these, little teenagers. So just got the hell out of Dodge and took the long way around to get back home.
so that's your
And
mark.
it was about 2 years later, because we didn't live at that house very long. It was about 2 years later. Well, I must have been about 14 because about 2 years later, I was driving and I pulled into that gas station and our tracks were still there.
That's hilarious. I mean, that's literally your imprint.
Yeah. So I don't even know if that gas station's still there. I suppose I could look it up on Google Earth, but or Google Maps satellite view and see if that gas station's still there. But undoubtedly that lot has been repaved by now, at
But
least once.
that's pretty freaking cool. Too bad you didn't take a picture of it, because even that is such
I
a.
didn't hang around and ask questions, man. I didn't hang around.
No, I'm saying the last time you, like, when
Oh
you saw
yeah.
it, because it is such a neat little variation on a. Talking about memories,
Hmm.
we have Jamie Page here, so I'm gonna, because I never saw it, whether, not that he had to or not, but if I don't know if he saw it, I actually wrote. I don't know if even Jamie Page knows this. I wrote Jamie Page a poem. I don't know
Oh.
if Jamie Page has ever had a poem written about him, and so, as I'll share the poem that I wrote, just as a thing, and I'll say it poorly, but I wrote it out in a somewhat rhyme, but I was abstract with it. So I'll try. Once there was an English lad whose fleece was white as snow, although that's not true, but through frosty window from the street a shop light always glowed. As gifts to send for family friends, he turned such things as bowls and pens. From Margate town in northern Kent, when work was done his gifts were sent. But the bestest gift, I must declare, was when he bust out from broad stairs. And to London town he did go, despite the sleet, the wind, and snow. At Abbey Road one early morn, where Beatles played many a score, he penned my name by the gates close to that Abbey entrance door. And so, dear friend, Mr. Page, I still remember that one day.
That's actually pretty freaking good.
I told the story of when Page went and said, "Dude, I'm gonna go to Abbey Road for you," and
Yeah.
he called me live, but I was asleep. So
Mhm.
he was filming the thing, and so I saw it after the fact, but it was still kick ass.
Went to Abbey Road Studios and wrote your name on a pillar there, huh?
On the right in front. Very
Hmm.
significant for me on in so many ways, because the Beatles opened doors.
Hmm.
You would have thought that the Doors opened doors, which they did too, but the Beatles opened doors that added to the mayhem, because uh, from the perspective, and this happened to you too. This had to have happened to you to a degree, but we've talked about it. By the time you're in the '80s as a kid, or growing up in the '80s as a kid, a young kid, and you're growing up and you're getting information from the state radio station, and you're starting to put two and two together about how, where certain sounds are coming from when it comes to music. My first understanding was that a band sounds like itself and not like other
Yeah,
genres and things.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So when I heard Michael Jackson, I would think, oh, that's another song of Michael Jackson's,
Hmm.
in line with Michael Jackson's history of songs. Although that's not true too if you think back at the Jackson 5, but it's got a thing.
But it's emblematic of his solo career.
Exactly. So there's a trend there, and it's
Hmm.
stable, at least apparently it looks like. But when I connected the dots with the Beatles, and that they were from a ragtime, you know, somewhat
Hmm.
jumpy piano sound to a heavy roller coaster type song that's harkening to some sort of punk thrashing
Hmm.
craziness, garage band, to very pristinely written love songs, to psychedelically drenched
Yeah.
sounds like Sergeant Pepper's, or well produced, intricate numbers, and like Abbey Road. Just once it blew my mind, because it said You could do anything. Literally, that's one of the things that the
Mhm.
Beatles are. They may not be saying it outright, but you can extrapolate from that. They didn't stay in their lane.
No, they didn't have a lane, but you always knew it was the Beatles because nobody else had that sound. It could go in any direction. I agree with you 100%. You could get real smooth and sensitive, like Let It Be or Yesterday. And then next thing you know, here is Revolution. I mean, it could go in all kinds of different directions. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Here Comes the Sun. It was the Beatles sound, but everything was different.
From that point on, almost it took a while, but every other musician took quite the back seat because they all sounded, to a degree. It's not true 100%, but I'll just make the equivalence. Everything was a broken record. How? In terms of the Beatles were always doing new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Every other band was doing the same stuff over again. Although that's not at all true, but the nuance in it is that
Well,
we're talking about.
but at the time, it it was true. At the time, see, the Beatles were successful enough that they could afford to explore. Bands coming up behind them didn't have that luxury. There were very few bands that had the clout, that had the name, and that had the resources and the money, let's be honest, to just go in and do something like Rubber Soul, the album. The rest of them basically had to toe that commercial line. They had to toe the record label's line, where the Beatles could more or less, they had the room to explore. I mean, are you going to tell Paul McCartney no? If you did, you'd be out on your ear, because the folks up above knew that if McCartney or Lennon or Harrison had their name on it, it was going to be a score. It was going to be a hit. So leave them alone, give them what they want. There were very few bands that had that kind of clout. Though they came along later, the Led Zeppelins, the Pink Floyds, the Rush, those kind of bands. Even the Beach Boys didn't really have the clout. I know you know the story, but Pet Sounds didn't come about overnight, and it wasn't smooth sailing. In fact, I think they were kind of lucky in some regards that the album ever got put together. But there were very few bands that had that much working room to get stuff like that done.
I put the Beach Boys on par with the Beatles after the fact. Well, even during that time, I liked the quality. Remember that band? We're going to the country, baby.
Yeah,
Don't
Canned Heat.
wanna go.
Canned Heat.
Um, the well, there's that with some sort of country feel to it,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't quite call it country. It's completely country, but you can't, but not really. But you can't quite call it country in terms of Hank Williams and I
No.
just so. But here's the thing: the Beach Boys had this acapella vibe, this barbershop thing, and the bounding line, the bounding thing between all of them was this extracting musical styles from another era
Mm-hmm.
and incorporating it into their timeline that I found fascinating.
Well, but also they pushed the technology. They pushed the limits. They didn't want to toe the record label's line and go for the 2.5 minute AM, drive time pop ditty. They could do that. I mean, that's how they started their careers, but they wanted to go beyond that.
Yeah, the sound from an era past brought into a modern time, modern then, like 60s and 70s, in conjunction with the rock and roll. I found that very special, discovering it in the 80s and having the back catalog, which we have talked about.
Yeah.
On par with that, it's enough to make a kid go, nuts because it's so outrageous. By the time it gets to my time, the back catalog of not only music proper, but photographic imagery,
Hmm.
plus stories and articles written in various magazines, just the back and books, the back catalog that I had access to
Yeah.
was so insane that it created the equivalent, to bring it to Tolkien again, the equivalent of a world like Tolkien created, except in this case it was created by multiple people across decades, um, under the category of music,
Hmm.
and art. It all blended into this massive thing. And so, as psychedelic as the 60s was, even though I wasn't participant of it at the time, my psychedelic revolution started in the 80s as I opened up these books and started, and my mind being capable of taking this stuff in, was a feature of that era because it was the time that I
Hmm.
was in. So it's quite weird, but I'll give you one other thing. I remember Casey Kasem's hot
American
top
Top
10,
40.
top 40 on TV. He had a show,
Hmm.
and it was right after the cartoons. At the
Hmm.
time, cartoons was my mainstay, and then that came on, and just as soon as that came on, within maybe half of the show, I had to get up and go, with my father, um, to go wherever. Well, in that show, in that video show, because it was video,
Hmm.
they would play things like Say with Paul
Yeah.
McCartney and I
Michael
was
Jackson.
watching, and Michael Jackson, as it came out fresh.
Hmm. Yeah.
But my context, and that was kind of, but my context to Paul McCartney was that,
Yeah.
and in it, I think he dresses up like an old farmer guy,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I mean, I didn't think this through. I liked the song. It sounded great. But I was thinking to myself, there's this old guy, and then there's this hot trending Michael Jackson guy. So Michael Jackson's the star, which he was. But so was Paul McCartney. But I didn't know who the heck Paul McCartney was. He was just a guy sitting there singing along with the thing. But boy, what's going on here? That odd extracting Paul McCartney from his
Hmm.
Abbey Road Beatles days into this American countryside with Michael Jackson there. Um, it You see the disconnection. I couldn't. It wasn't till little by little later connections started to. I started to discover the tapestry that was this world of music and such. And so, to a kid like myself, interested in music and seeing all these things, boy, get me a guitar ASAP.
Yeah. You wanted to be a part of it.
I wanted to fricking explore that that world. I mean, it had everything. It had stories. It had
Hmm.
music, obviously. Um, Chicks were just every. I mean, everything that was good to a kid at the time. And the last one I'll say is that, to as a parallel example to Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson.
Hmm.
Here comes this guy that's singing a song where the chorus is "Let's dance"
Oh,
with
David
weird
Bowie.
David Bowie with weird sounds,
Hmm.
and then a guitar solo. I'm a little kid,
Hmm.
and all these sounds, and his other song, um, there's "Let's Dance," but there was, or is it the same one? If we should fall, under my
Yeah.
heart,
That's the same one.
tremble like a flower.
Hmm.
Okay, so all the sounds in that song are grabbing from the past.
Hmm.
I couldn't understand that at the time. It just sounded like 80s,
Hmm.
a contemporary.
It
But what it
was. It was. It's the poster child of the '80s.
but what it really was, if you break it into parts,
Hmm.
it's horns that were extracted from times gone by. it's blues, it's just
It's a
everything mixed.
blues progression. It's everything.
Yeah,
And it's Stevie Ray Vaughan playing that final guitar solo.
yeah. But
And
but
I'd never heard of him at the time.
but and me neither. Well, all these people were new to me.
Mm,
But if you go back to David Bowie,
mm-hmm.
the context is completely different than what we're looking at in the 80s.
Yeah.
David Bowie was a psychedelic superstar
Well, he was a glam rocker big time.
from who knows where in outer space, coming down
Mm-hmm.
to 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 to, to sing his. So he even looked the part. Well,
Ziggy Stardust. Yeah.
what's even weirder for a kid in the 80s
Mm-hmm.
is to for Christmas to come around, to have a tree at home here in Sweetwater with all the trimmings, and then your Christmas cards and your whatnot, and you're there with your mom, and they turn on the TV, and on the TV is David Bowie.
You're not far from wrong.
Yeah. There's David Bowie with frickin' what's this guy's name? The tap dancer doing a Christmas special.
Oh,
Fred Astaire.
uh, um, yeah, he sang Little Drummer Boy with, I want to say it was Bing
Bing
Crosby.
Crosby. It
Maybe
was
I'm
Bing.
wrong.
No, I think it was Bing. It was either Fred
Okay.
Astaire or Bing Crosby. One of the
Well,
two.
he sang with a few of the old greats.
Yeah.
But the Christmas, I want to say it was David Bowie and Bing Crosby did Little Drummer Boy.
So I'm seeing this on TV
Hmm. Yeah.
back in the day as it aired. My mom there in the context of a Cuban exile family in Sweetwater, rock and roll plus the just the layers of desperate different things
Yeah.
put into a blender.
Yeah.
Me as a kid taking it all in, the notion how do you so perhaps this was the beginning of a never ending story till this day
Well,
of being completely jaw dropped about freaking everything, because everything is so psychedelic, dude.
well,
Everything.
be glad you had a back catalog to go to, because my back catalog was Chubby Checker and Danny and the Juniors and the Big Bopper and the Chiffons and the Platters and things like that. That was my back catalog, and I liked it. It was okay. But it wasn't until then I'm like, holy cow, this music is for me. This is my stuff. Leave me alone. Your stuff was yours. This is mine. Give it to me. You know, that was my awakening. And I could never understand my parents' objections to it, because to me, I kind of took basically the Billy Joel approach to all of this stuff, and I still do. It's all rock and roll to me. I can get just as hyped up about Dion and the Belmonts as I can about Led Zeppelin. You know, um,
I'm like that.
well, Billy Joel and his song, hot punk, cool funk, even if it's old junk, it's still rock and roll to me. I don't care. I get just as excited about doo-wop as I do about Motown as I do about Delta blues.
You want to
If
know
it's
what?
if it's good music, I like it.
Yeah,
And
I
that's all
agree.
there is to it.
I agree. Um, except my caveat to that is that I find myself more and more difficult to be endeared to music post 1990 91.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There are a few exceptions, but they're few and far in between. It just depends on the act and what the setting. Um, it's strange the different manifestations it took too, because I can remember. Well, you took somebody like Jim Croce. At the time, Bad Leroy Brown was big. It was gigantic. It was, but it was still that almost folk song quality to it. It was all acoustic. It was all, I don't know, some of it was real heavy blues, some of it was real romantic love songs, but it wasn't rock and roll. But I didn't care, you know. Um, uh, well, I keep bringing them up all the time. Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, they were not rock and roll, but I dug the hell out of them. The Temptations, give me more. Uh, the Shy Lights, give me more. I mean, name the Motown band.
The Ink
I
Spots.
love it. I even like the Ink Spots. Sure.
Me too.
You can go way back in some of these. I can get into some Glenn Miller. I can get into some Dizzy Gillespie. It just depends on the kind of mood, but it was always the performance, the setting, the situation. We all get into moods for various thises and that's, but I think with technology has developed to the point that, as you've said many times, there's no soul there. There's no humanity in it. There's a guy on YouTube. His channel is called The Wings of Pegasus. And he's been doing a lot over the last year with separating vocals out of music and looking to see, are they using pitch corrections or auto tune in their vocals. And he'll go way back into stuff that was made long before auto tune ever existed or was any such thing as pitch correction. And then he'll get new stuff and compare, contrast them. And you can definitely see in the analyzing software that lack of humanity, because where, like, Freddie Mercury would come up and hit a note bang on and then trail off just a little bit, he'll be just a little bit flat, but you didn't notice it when he was singing. Whereas somebody today would do some pitch correction and keep that note, keep that right on that note. It sounds fake as hell. So I wonder if that isn't a part of why we find it easier to make an emotional connection to music of the era, 70s, 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s, up to the early 90s, and find it so difficult to make any kind of an emotional connection with something new.
No, I don't think so. I think it's and it might play some part in it, but I think it would be minimal. I think what it's the same answer as the question. Well, it's the same question as you did before, as last week, where you said something to the effect of, "Do we find it? Why do we find it, or why does it seem that the as older we get, like these holidays don't seem as shiny or sparkly, or something to that effect?"
Mm-hmm.
Older, I think it's the same story. Um, we've been there, done that, and so we have a collection of memories, and those are
Mm-hmm.
precious to us. My memories of my growing up are more precious than and tangible in a mental way, emotional way, than something that comes out tomorrow. I'm quick to disregard it, um, not
But
because it
why?
not because it might it. Well, I'm explaining why. Because
Mm-hmm.
we have memories,
Yeah.
we have attachment to the past in whatever way we do, where we add value to it, because not only can we recall it in our minds,
Mm-hmm.
we have a circumstance surrounding said song.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it could be as simple as driving down the highway with the top down, and
Sure.
listening to Martha and the Vandellas, or
Sure.
I mean any number of things, and those things get cooked in that stew of, instead of using baked in,
Man.
I'm trying to find some other type of cooking. Um,
Yeah, I get it. They do make an impression on you. And I'm of the same way. I tend to think of some music in snapshots of what I was doing at the time, or who I was with at the time, or different areas that I lived maybe. Um, but I'm still open to discovering new things. I'm still open to, because I had no memories attached with the first time I heard Los Lonely Boys, you know, but I'll listen to them all the time. Henry Garza is a
Yeah,
fabulous guitarist.
but I will say this: I thought it was an instant classic the first time it came out,
Yeah.
in my opinion. However, I will say this about that: you're talking about a song that's now probably about 15, 20 years. I don't know how long it might be, but you've had enough road road wear
Hmm.
from then till now for it to have become part of your archival
True.
past memory catalog.
True. But what I'm getting at is if somebody else came along today that could emulate that emotional connection, that could make that same kind of emotional connection, I'd be right there on it. So
Yeah.
I'm open to new stuff, but what I'm not open to is the over processed stuff that sounds canned, corporate, and mechanical. There's got to be some humanity in there.
Let me tell you about a traumatizing moment for me. I may be overstating that by a lot, but it's sufficient that I remember it.
Mm.
One holiday season, a long time ago, and I can start saying that right about now,
Mhm.
roughly. Um, I can start saying that with confidence. Where some people will say, "Well, that ain't nothing," but I'm just there where I can say it, and
Yeah.
people will oftentimes say, "Yeah, you know what? Okay, we'll give you a pass on that one, dude, because yeah, that sure is a long time ago." So I'm kind of in that sphere, you know. So at my aunt's house one holiday season, which I used to love to go to, her house was completely covered in carpet. It
Mhm.
was brand new back then, and not the house that she's in now, but it back then. Um, and she had this plastic rolled out pathway down every corridor,
I
so
remember
that
those.
yeah, so that you wouldn't mess with the carpet itself.
The clear vinyl
It was a clear
rolled out.
vinyl,
Yeah.
and
I
it had these
remember
little
that.
sharpie sharp
Yeah.
things, and I guess that's so it would stay put.
Yeah,
Um,
to grip the fibers of the
and
carpet
it
so it
sure
so you
did.
didn't slide all over the place. Yeah.
Did you ever fold it over and put your foot on it just to because as a kid I did, to put on the tacky tack side, and it was like it would pinch
It-
you.
just once. Is
That's all
that
you
damn
need.
that hurts. Yeah, that's all you need.
Well, that was her house, and she also had the most incredible, apart from cable TV,
Hmm.
which we did not have at home.
Yeah.
We had it for a little while, but then my dad said, "No, screw this," and done. Um, but at my aunt's house, there was cable, so she had all the cartoons in the morning.
Hmm.
Cartoons that were uniquely on cable
Hmm.
that I couldn't access at home, and I was blown away. It just space something, Space Hawk or something. He was a guy.
Space Ghost.
Well, he had a black hat.
Space Ghost.
That guy. Oh, dude, just to see that coming on early in the morning as the light was coming up, it just. Anyways, but she also had that was amazing.
Hmm.
A stereo system and record collection from here to the other side of the room. It was lining the whole living room. It was freaking the technology was freaking awesome. And I remember being over there, and she brought over a cassette or album, one of the two. I don't remember that detail, but I remember the cover. And she says, "This is an awesome album, Elo." She would call me,
Uh,
um, like the band,
hmm.
and she'd call me Elo, um, to this day. Um, and she showed me the album cover. She says, "This is an awesome music. We're gonna play it. It's really great." It was Bruce Springsteen's "Born in the USA," and
Uh-huh.
all I the trauma, all I could see, it was an American flag,
Mm-hmm.
but there was a guy's butt staring right at you. And I'm looking at that. I'm like, I can't even say the word that I thought, but
Yeah.
it's one word. It
Yeah.
starts with
I
G.
get it. Yeah, I
Like
get it.
from a kid's perspective, male,
Mm-hmm.
it's all that
Mm-hmm.
same word.
Yep.
It's like I don't want, like, I didn't tell my aunt that, but like I was like, she showed me that. Like, to her, it was probably like the best thing since sliced bread. Look at
Well,
this. But to me, I'm looking at this guy with a handkerchief sticking out of his freaking back pocket, and his freaking butt sitting there staring at us. I don't want any part of that, on my beautiful aunt. I don't want none of that. And so I remember that. And I think that may have started my love hate relationship with album covers. If I see something on an album that I dislike, I may never listen to that music. I don't care who you are. That's just it is.
pretty short sighted, but hey, we all have tastes. We all have tastes.
You're talking to a
I
kid
I
back
I
then.
I never understood the hype with Springsteen because by the time that album that you're talking about came out, he was already big,
If you can find them,
and
if you
I
can muster,
never understood the hype.
if you could muster, forgive you me, I'll take that one. I'll take that L,
Mhm.
Mark Lindsay,
I
because if
just
you can, it's on. I know where I stand on this one. If you
well,
could
that's fine.
handle busting out that Bruce Springsteen freaking ass in the freaking face cover bullcrap, and by the way, the album, obviously I did listen to the album. It's okay. Um, I think it's too synthy, but whatever.
I've
Um,
never listened to the album.
oh, we'll see. That saved you because my
I
my
mean,
my critique.
I've never owned a Springsteen album. Like I said, I never understood the hype. He had one or two good songs. I liked the song Pink Cadillac, but that was about it.
By the way, as soon as I tell you what I just said,
Uh-huh.
let's be clear. On the other hand, at home I had a record of Twisted Sister
Hmm.
with these lipstick laden frickin' blonde curly
And that was
haired
okay.
monstrous creatures wearing latex and chains, but that was fine.
And that was okay.
And but that was fine, exactly. So
but
contradictions,
but not Mark Knopfler just because he wore a headband.
exactly. Well, no, Mark Knopfler is a different one because by the time Mark Knopfler comes onto my radar, it was MTV where I first was exposed, and the car and the um uh
Yeah, they they
video.
they overplayed the hell out of that video because they talk about MTV in the video.
And in the video, apart from the bandana bit,
Hmm.
there are these 1980s cartoon computer generated
Yeah,
graphics
yeah,
that
8-bit
even back
graphic. Yeah.
then,
Hmm.
even back then, as it was happening
Hmm.
to me, I don't know about everybody around me, I never got the point to ask, looked freaking cheesy
It was
even
supposed
back
to.
then.
It was supposed to. It was satire. Uh, Every word of that song was almost verbatim something he heard in an appliance store. He overheard a delivery guy talking to another guy, and just about every word in that song was their discussion verbatim. And it was supposed to be cheesy. He was trying to portray that guy as a cheesy person.
I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I didn't like it. But then again, flip the page again.
Mhm.
This is why taste can't be accounted for.
No,
And I
it
get
can't.
that. I understand that. But flip the page again,
Uh-huh.
and then we have a situation like, well, hell, what's this guy's name? Zappa.
Hmm.
Frank Zappa, in terms of tongue in cheek and complete
Hmm.
cringe moments when it comes to what's in the song, or even on an album cover, I totally freaking dug for some reason or another. Well, there's many reasons I can say because he was freaking brilliant, but it's like, why am I totally down with Zappa? Well, he was a great guitar player. There's a lot of reasons.
Hmm.
It's my bias. But I see the other thing and I'm like, you know what it was also? Knopfler, I don't like the bandana. I'm sorry. It looked like tennis to me. It
Yeah,
looked like Caddyshack.
it was supposed to.
I hated it.
Well, there was a practical application too. I showed you that one quote
Yeah.
from that one woman. Oh, give me more liquid testosterone, because he's sweating all over the front row as he's shaking his head playing guitar. And he's like, you know what? That is kind of gross. So he started putting the headband on so he didn't sweat all over the audience
Yeah.
because his hairline is right about here. But yeah, let me throw something in here. You're talking about different styles and different people getting together. He did an album with Chet Atkins, and it's called Neck and Neck. And oh my God, two of the best players to ever fingerstyle a guitar. It's a killer album. It's really a killer album. That was something else about Knopfler. He never used a pick. He played fingerstyle, everything. And he described his style, his right hand style, as a guitar teacher's nightmare.
I'll just say this: one of the best and most prolific, in my opinion, writers and performers, very Americana, was Billy Joel, and
I can't argue with that.
he sang a song called "It's All About Soul"
Hmm.
in the chorus, and to me, now what that exactly means from person to person could be slightly dialed depending on other ingredients that screw it up for someone or make it better for someone.
Hmm.
But if all the things, if enough of the little points of me connecting with it are met, I will disregard uh, a crappy outfit. I will disregard a dumb lyric, a bad played note, um, a political alignment. But it has to be a series of things that personally hit the right note for me. It's the same reason that I like Bob Dylan, even though I hate to say it, but many of the songs may sound like a shriek.
Yeah, he doesn't have the best voice in the world.
But I disregard that because of the legendary
Songwriter.
components, right, put together. And I will and did, I don't know if I would nowadays, but I did spend hours and hours and hours just playing Dylan songs
Hmm.
and buying his books and reading
Yep.
them. So, whereas many of my friends may not have, because it's like, why even bother with this shrill thing?
The first box set I ever bought was Dylan. The Bob Dylan box set that came out in the late 80s. That was the first box set I ever bought.
That's a
And
bold
I
move.
was hooked. Well, I like Dylan. But you mentioned Billy Joel, and we were back talking about Beatles and Beach Boys and everything else, and everything being different. If you think about Billy Joel's catalog and you look at all of his hits, no two were the same style. They were all completely different sounds. Piano Man, She's Always a Woman. What was that do? Well, he did Tell Her About It. We Didn't Start the Fire, but he did that do The Longest Time. There is one musical instrument in that song. It's a bass guitar. Everything else is their voices. And it's a fantastic tune. But every song he put out was different. Every hit he had was completely different.
And that leads me to this, going back to all the problems of growing up in the 80s, watching things out of context,
Mm-hmm.
and then discovering where the actual context began, such
Mm-hmm.
as like the Beatles and, well, Billy Joel was another one.
Mm-hmm.
I heard Billy Joel on the radio
Mm-hmm.
through the older people in my family,
Same
my
here.
aunt mostly. So it wasn't me directly
Mm-hmm.
seeking it out. But then a TV show sometime in the 80s came out. Um, I think it was Bosom Buddies.
Mhm.
And the opening song to that was a Billy Joel song. And I didn't make the connection literally. Or maybe I did. I don't remember at this point. But I remember liking that show. Well, it was funny. Where I was a kid growing up watching it. There
Mhm.
was these two guys dressed. Maybe that affected society today because it was Tom
Tom
Hanks.
Hanks, yeah. And when you think back to that, who would have thought that that one guy from that sitcom would become one of the highest paid, most respected actors in American history?
Yeah, I mean, well, actually, what's funny? Back then, not to leave the Billy Joel thing, but he did have the opening show song.
Mhm.
And so I listened to it in that context,
Mhm.
not in the context of Jilly. That's
Billy Joel, yeah.
Jilly Joel of Billy Joel proper, but in the
Mhm.
context of a TV show. So that's another mind twister because then you discover that there's this whole thing where Hollywood and plus this and so you're growing up and this is how you're learning about it. Well, um, to talk about Tom Hanks, um, one of his that I remember, his early that I went to see just over here across the freaking road.
Mhm.
It's no longer a movie theater. Um, the first and only movie theater in Sweetwater's history was right across the road, and we used to go to it. Um, now it's a Central American diner place. Um, I went over there and saw that movie, The Money Pit. I think it was. Yeah, The Money.
That was my was that Tom Hanks? Yes, it was.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, it was. Okay.
And
The
so,
first one I ever saw of him outside of the context of that sitcom, and I remember the sitcom. I didn't watch it very often, but my parents did. Um, was what was the one with him and Daryl Hannah? She was the mermaid. Splash.
Splash.
Yeah, that was the first movie I saw of him outside of that sitcom. And still, if you take the Money Pit and Splash and you put those two together, you still don't arrive at one of the most successful, highly paid Oscar winning actors in American history.
No,
You still don't come up with that.
these were the early days of
But
that generation of actors
mhm.
playing with the previous generation of actors, and that's how it pays forward throughout the decades. And so I guess, look, I'll just say this, and I know that you kind of in the past we agree on this roughly with our respective little variations in it, but isn't that everything?
Well, sure.
We're passing the torch onward, 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 and things that were 10 years ago blend into things that are 10 years now, and
Right.
those things blend into 10 years. And so this continuum of things pushed forward. Some things fall off the table as the train is moving down
Sure.
and
But
those things that, well, let me just say this bit. This is just one of
yeah,
those things just this last thing. Those bits that fall off the table may become the antiquated artifacts that then later, like you or I, might be digging around and we say, "Hey, remember this?" And then it becomes, and that's exciting. Anyways, go ahead.
a lot of that is exciting, depending upon what it is. Because between you, me, and the fly on the wall, some of that stuff needed to fall off the table. Some of it should have never been there in the first place. As evidence, I give you "Sugar Sugar" by the Archies. Let it die. Okay, it's gone. That's the kind of music they play to try to get like Noriega to come out of the embassy in Panama. They use that for psyops. We don't need that on the radio anymore.
I
Um,
liked it. I
but
liked it.
the first 750,000 times it was played, it was okay. After that, it got a little old. But the thing that I was gonna, and I lost it. Some of that stuff needed to fall off the table, but then again, it's guys like you and me that keep dragging stuff with us and trying to show it to people who coming after us.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, the first time I played Black Sabbath for my daughter, she was like, "Who is this?" But then next thing I know, she's telling her friends about this band she just heard called Black Sabbath, and now they're playing the tape or the CD. So a lot of it does get passed down and come along with us for the ride. But something I'm seeing now is a lot of people going back and discovering that old stuff. I don't remember every song that I used to like back in the day. There's no way I could catalog it. There are certain lines that'll all of a sudden pop into my head, and I'll go down the line and I'll type them in, and then oh, okay, that's what that group was. That's what that song was. And then I'll, do my thing, and now I've got it. But I can't remember every tune that I liked. So how can I share that with somebody else if I don't even remember what the hell it was?
So
You know?
using that, one of the things that I've thought, which is quite the task, so I haven't done that yet. I've done it in little ways,
Hmm.
but if you wanted to recount all your life
Hmm.
and know what you were doing at each moment across the years, you could, well, you could approximate it
Yeah,
as best you could.
sure.
And one of the techniques, which I've thought about, but it is a monumental task, and I've done it in little ways, is to write out the years, you as the subject, all the features that came out movie wise, music wise, events, and so on, along with the things you remember, and then you start to adjust them into the time frames to get a big picture.
Yeah.
Now, in many cases, you'll have a window of a few years that to play with.
Yeah.
But if you remember of a situation where maybe you were with your grandfather at the store, and it just so happened that at that year you also something came on the news or the and you sort of what's it called when you take 3 points and
Triangulate.
you triangulate best you can arrive at maybe not pinpoint, but you can arrive at a clearer. So you know how a lot of people, and this happened to me until I started doing what I do,
Hmm.
like the little things that I write, you miscalculate when certain stuff happened in your life because you don't have a bookend. You're just saying random stories. But if you were to do that I'm saying, and other people have done, I mean, in order to write a book
Sure.
about the history of George Washington, you need to do
Sure.
stuff like that. You could do that for like your grandfather, for according to the stories he said. And so, like my grandfather would say stories, you could literally, as best you can,
Hmm.
bookend it with events that were happening at the time and such. Maybe a passport, maybe a this, and arrive at some sort of. And so you can recreate, and that's what they do with the older 1700s people back in America when it in
Well,
colonial
I've
time.
done that with my family tree. I mean, I found out that my great grandfather, their property on the Applegate River got flooded out, and they moved into a town called Grants Pass, and they built a hotel, and they stayed there until it burned down, and then moved in with somebody else. But I could triangulate when that happened based on the big flood on the Applegate River that wiped out so many farms.
Yeah,
Theirs being one of them. That was 1890. So now I know that. It was never mentioned, but now I know they got flooded out in 1890
yeah.
and moved into Grants Pass.
Maybe the newspapers of the time would have recorded something or another event.
Mhm.
Um, and then you can tell what the people in the area
Right.
of whatever said event would have dealt with. Who was the, I don't know, mayor or
Well,
fire department, if there was such a thing. Just all these things. And so once you start populating the place where your ancestor or ancestors were, you get a circling of the wagons of the environment, um, that may not be specific to that particular ancestor directly, but it's directly enough to get an essence of this is what that grandfather would have had going on around him, and it gives you perspective, and I like that. Um, and the same thing happens to bring it back to the music thing and this and that and movies. The same thing happens with artists and like music when you're learning about the Beatles or Led Zeppelin. They've got books on those people,
oh yeah.
and boy, those books. There's one called I think it's called Thunder of the Gods or something like that, by the Led Zeppelin story. Dude, that book is like this thick. Dude, it was awesome, dude. It was awesome. I read it twice. I would reread books, but it had to be biographies.
Wow.
Um, and that's another thing I didn't remember until you and I started doing this show.
Hmm.
I read a lot when I was a kid. I stopped doing that sometime in the 2000s, actually, or slightly, yeah, sometime in 2000. But I spent a good decade and a half actually reading pretty profusely. Um, but I had forgotten that I did such,
Hmm.
and then and I didn't even question why I would say, "Oh, I know this and this happened." I may
Yeah.
not have gotten
You
every
don't know where you picked it up, but it's some things stay in there. Yeah.
right, and then
I do
some
that all the
details.
time.
Well, some details may be a little lackluster,
Hmm.
but where did that come from? Well, no, it came from because you actually consumed it.
Hmm.
But it wasn't until me reflecting and doing these timeline things and putting things into perspective that you start realizing you can look back and say, well, the history is, and that's been very useful for me.
Well, I
You
do it
know,
in my own life. I do it with me all the time. I'll give you an example. I think it was last week, may have been a couple weeks ago. I was telling you about how I taught myself how to ride a bike when I was 3 years old.
yeah, that you'd push off the rock.
The only way I knew that I was 3 years old, because I'm three, you don't know you're three when you're three. The only way that I knew that was based on where we lived. And I remember later that same year, we had to move out of that house because it flooded. And it flooded so bad. I mean, that flood, it's still listed on the US Geological Survey's website. 47 people died, left thousands homeless, and caused more than, by today's money, $3.9 billion worth of damage. It encompassed 200,000 square miles, which is roughly the size of France. What I remember about it was my dad was working for the state of Oregon at the time on the graveyard shift. We were staying at my grandparents' house in Medford. We had gone there for the day. And then we got a panicked phone call from dad. Two guys went into the house, two guys that knew dad was in there asleep. They went into the house and got dad out of bed in a rowboat. They went into the house in a boat and got him out of bed. It was floating.
That's crazy.
Got him into the boat, took him, someplace away from the river. He called the Medford and we went and got him.
What year was that?
1964. And that was called the Christmas flood. It started on the storm started on December 10th and didn't leave until like the first week of January. So that's how, knowing when that flood was and being able to research it and find out when that flood was in 64, I could come back and say I was 3 years old because I was 3 years old in December of 64.
That's a good marker right there. It clears that up.
So I still use that kind of thing today to kind of place myself in a time and a place. And knowing what I did then and being able to kind of come back and forth with various facts, I can kind of place myself and go, wow, I did that when I was three. Holy cow. You
That's
know,
pretty freaking. That's a good example of that, actually. Yeah.
so
Well, like for me, one of the big discoveries for me, although you could argue, why wouldn't I know it? But was discovering the timeline of when I was born. My father had only been here for a decade in the United States, for about a decade and some change.
mhm,
My mom, under a decade. My grandparents, under a decade.
yeah,
They had been here. It's like looking back now to 2024, to 2004.
yeah,
But if you think of
yeah,
2000, But if you think of from now back to 2004, that's a lot of living.
It is a lot of living, but it doesn't seem like it to me anyway. To me, the number 2004 doesn't seem that long ago.
No, but if
Knowing what I was doing and where I was, that seems ages ago.
okay, that's what I mean. So like if we were to be transported back to 2004,
Mhm.
you and I and everybody else here, we were in completely different situations in terms of a bunch of stuff. And a lot of stuff has happened since then. So there is a good chunk of change there, even though you're talking about 10 years, let's say.
Well, that'd
Um,
be 20 years, but yeah.
oh, actually, I said two. So it's, you know what? Let's scratch that because I'm trying to
But
parallel it.
okay, well,
Um,
let's even go back to 2014. I mean,
that's what I was,
we were in this house, but it was a completely different situation for us,
right.
you know.
Well, yeah. So if I were to go back 2014, um, well, I'm not going to explore that one because there was somebody here. It was a different situation. And so it was a different situation.
Yeah,
Um,
let's leave it at that.
yeah. But since then, a whole bunch of stuff has
Yeah,
happened.
there's a lot of living in the last 10 years. Yeah.
Right. So you could make the argument. So from one perspective, me looking back at when I'm born, basically it was roughly a decade and a half to some spare change,
Mhm.
um, under a decade and a half that the Cuban exile community began its trek to the United States.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was all behind me from the moment I'm born, and people were already set up.
Yeah.
So I came into a situation where what was normal was a Cuban exile community with stores and businesses and police officers and
Mhm.
judges within a 10 and a half year 10 and some change half spare change of time,
Mhm.
a whole group of people from another country.
Yeah, you didn't see it get built. You were born, it was already there.
It was already there and they had infused themselves into the country here
Mhm.
in such a way where it was for me not even a
Yeah, it was just normal.
question. Yeah, you had Cuban exiles and you had other people that weren't Cuban exiles, and it was just that's how it was. And it's totally psychedelic, dude. It's
Yeah,
freaking
well,
psychedelic. I'm telling you,
all
you're
of
not
it's that
only are
way.
you eating hot dogs and freaking barbecue
Mhm.
at your local Shoney's or Lum's,
Mhm.
eatery,
Mhm.
but you're eating Cuban freaking shredded beef and rice and plantains
Yeah.
all in the same timeline.
Well,
You're
see,
listening to Spanish music and this music and that.
there's a real teeny tiny example. I have never had a plantain in my life.
Slap yourself twice and cover
See,
yourself
I, now
in
that's not because they're not available. It's just because when I first saw plantains, I thought those are the weirdest looking bananas I've ever seen. And my dad told me, he was grocery store worker. He's like, no, they're not like bananas. You can't just peel it and eat it. They have to be cooked. I'm like, okay, that's weird, but I never gave it a second thought. And I still to this day have never had a plantain in my life. I wouldn't know what it tastes like. To me, well, they don't grow around here. And it's not a part of any of the cultures that I grew up with.
it's a Caribbean thing, dude.
So yeah, it's
Ah,
so
that limited.
I'm about as far away from the Caribbean as you can get without taking an airplane to go further west.
Yeah, it's a Caribbean thing, but on its own, nobody that I know. I mean, it's usually a side bit
Hmm.
on the larger, so you have a little bit of sweet
Sure.
mixed in there. So there's that. So it's not a thing on its own that I'm aware of.
Yeah. But we can get them there. We can go to the grocery store and get them, but I wouldn't know what to do with it when I got it here. It's kind of like folks in the East Coast. especially the Northeast and the Midwest, where there were huge groves of chestnut trees. They know how to eat chestnuts. I'm in the Pacific Northwest. We got pine cones out here. We don't got any chestnut trees. I can buy chestnuts in the store, but I wouldn't know what to do with them if I got them. You know, how do you roast a chestnut? I don't know.
You know that chestnuts are ubiquitous in Cantabria. So much so. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if it's true in English. You'll tell me now, I'm sure. But in Spanish, particularly to the region that paternally I derive from, there's a surname which the equivalent in English is chestnut, and I have them on my tree. They're called chestnut, but in Spanish they're called castañera or castaneda. There's variations of it too, um, and it's basically chestnuts. So
Okay.
they basically is there in English? Is there an equivalent to
Um,
somebody
I'm
named
sure
chestnut?
I'm sure chestnut could be a name. I mean, yeah, sure, why not? But American chestnuts were wiped out by a blight. I can't remember what exactly, whether it was a nematode or a spore or something like that. It was a blight. I'm sure somebody out there is already googling it now. Um, but it was they died off. This disease spread and killed off a bunch of them. There are still some American chestnuts out here, but not the not the stands the millions and millions of trees that there used to be.
It was a plague.
Yeah, it was basically a plague that wiped it out. And in fact, up in Canada, there is a research facility. They are trying to bring it back by trying to hybridize it with other chestnuts from Europe that are resistant to this plague of whatever it is. And they're trying to bring the American chestnut back. Because I mean, it was more that it's the North American chestnut. It wasn't just found in the US, it was all up in Canada as well. And it destroyed huge industries when they died. So
Is it a
but it wouldn't
fungus or a
it,
fungi,
it wouldn't
Jim
well,
Dockrell?
the fun guy is what you take to a party. Um so yeah. Now he said he's never had a low country boil either.
Sorry, I turned. There you go.
That is a regional thing.
And that usually can be treated if it grows on your ass.
A low country boil? Well, yeah, it depends. I mean, it may come from sitting, but a low country boil. You ever had boiled crab with like boiled potatoes, boiled corn, onions, things like that?
I think they're boiled when you get them at the restaurant, but never at home.
That's a low country boil. Basically, it's seafood. But with a low country boil, they'll have like smoked sausage in it. There'll be shrimp, there'll be crab, there'll be onions, potatoes, things like that. Put it all in a big pot, one of them big cast aluminum pots with the strainer basket in it. And you
Okay.
throw in some seasonings and what have you, boil it all up till everything is nice and cooked, pull it out, and then go for it.
It sounds like something that would. And by the way,
I
I'm
never
kind of.
had it by that name, is what I'm getting at, until we went to Savannah, Georgia. But yeah, we used to have that a lot out
I
there.
want to kind of say that it sounds something that would happen in the South,
Mm-hmm.
particularly across Louisiana and
Well,
Mississippi slash Alabama and parts of Florida. I feel like I want to say, but I did want to say I'm kind of amazed. That nobody. I liked my low country boil joke there, and I just want to say that I'm
yeah,
pretty
I'm trying to
proud of.
gloss. I'm trying to go past it.
I was pretty proud of that little moment. I just want to
Mhm.
leave that on the record. But
Mhm.
anyways,
Well, low country boil is actually a South Carolina thing. The South Carolina coast, and for about 50 miles inland, that area is called the Low Country.
okay.
And so right there at the Atlantic shore, all of that stuff, basically, that's where it came from.
but I don't know this for a fact, but it almost sounds like it feels like because number one, Louisiana is older than the Carolinas
Mhm.
by 100 years
Well,
probably, and I'm thinking of the bayous and all that. What do they call those little crabs that they have and those little
crawfish.
crawfish and this and that? So I can picture that kind of situation going on between
Mhm.
the French and the what, and so I would see it as a variation down there as well. But
Right. Well, yeah, the folks in South Carolina are not the only people to boil up huge masses of seafood and have a party.
yeah,
But the name Low Country Boil, that's where that came
from there,
from
okay.
that area. That's where that name came from,
Why
anyway.
were we touching on this actual thing?
Well, Jim mentioned it. We were talking about difference. I said I've never had a plantain in my life, and Jim said he's never had a Low Country Boil.
Oh no,
So
the that that pandemic that wiped out the chestnuts.
the chestnut trees, yeah. So there may be a chestnut surname out there. I don't know. In fact, I'm sure there is, because the more we say it, the more it sounds like there was somebody famous named Chestnut. Mark Chestnut is a country singer.
Chetnut Chetnut Atkins.
No. Now let me. Yeah, Mark Chestnut is a country singer.
Okay, there we go.
So there's one right there. Anyway, so um, yeah, why not?
Um
Yeah, and Steve got it too.
um sometime in the 90s there was also some sort of plague.
Hmm.
But what happened here in Florida, there's trees that are indigenous to Florida,
Hmm.
which are optimal. They root themselves and thrive.
Hmm.
And then there's imports that aren't as hardy and end up, they could have problems during storms and whatnot
Hmm.
and disease. Well, at
Sure.
one point, for some reason, it became business to decorate the streets every which down each lane,
Hmm.
and houses would plant them in between their fencing of a certain ficus plant
Hmm.
that would grow so many leaves and bush up
Hmm.
that it would be trimmed and create nice fencing of greenery,
No, yeah, hedges. Yeah.
like hedging.
Hmm.
And then a plague hit.
Hmm.
And for like, I don't know how many years, all those trees that had been planted had like one or two leaves on it and was just
Yeah.
all branches. So everywhere you'd go, you'd say, oh, ficus, 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 ficus. Um, Whereas the natural trees from here are badass, always staying put and freaking
Well,
solid, as can be.
that's why they're native. You
Yeah,
know,
they
I
they
mean,
they
but
are perfectly suited.
Linda, look it up. Linda looked it up. What killed off the chestnuts? It's a pathogenic fungus, and I'm not
Fungi.
going to try to pronounce those. Uh, and But it's native to East Asia. I do remember that it brought in. It was brought in with Asian imports, different trees and plants and what have you, and that's how that got wiped out. But yeah, I can't remember. I think it was 1920s that the last actual forest of chestnuts finally died off. The early 1920s, like 21 or 22, something like that.
Interesting.
So, but
Um,
we have inadvertently and sometimes intentionally done stupid things like that. Like I'll give you, for instance, have you heard of? You've heard of the bird, the starling.
what?
The starling, the bird.
Yes, yes. I don't know how it looks like.
There are huge flocks of them all over the Midwest, and farmers hate them because they eat the hell out of everything. Well, they were brought here by some dude in New York who thought that America should have at least some of every bird species mentioned in Shakespeare. So he imported a whole bunch of different birds and just basically let them all go. And the starlings took off. They are not native here. And farmers hate them. They hate them because they eat crops like crazy.
And they're everywhere.
And they're in flocks of in the millions. And they're not native here. They were brought in by somebody who thought it was a good idea that America had at least some representative of every species of bird that was mentioned in Shakespeare.
Well,
And
I
it's
mean,
like, are you kidding me?
that sort of thing has been happening
Mm-hmm.
forever, obviously. And
Mm-hmm.
what came to mind when you said that of import and whatnot um, was things like the horse. They've discovered ancient horses
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
in this continent,
Mm-hmm.
but ever since then, not a trace. And it took the Spanish to come here
Mm-hmm.
with horses. And the first thing that they saw was basically a man that was a continuum between
Mm-hmm.
animal and man, the head of a
Mm-hmm.
man and some
Oh
sort of
my
four-legged.
gosh. Yeah.
And so to them, when they first encountered this particular thing, although there were four-legged creatures just the
Sure.
same, but they didn't, have so um but just as soon as that, then the people here, native to here, incorporated this concept that was not part of their usual routine,
Mm-hmm.
and it became a staple of like the Indians. They
Sure.
basically, I mean, that that was something they put to good use.
Mm-hmm.
And it also got me to thinking more closer in time that a, a lot of so Florida has pines
Mm-hmm.
that are natural to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's called Southern Florida pine or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
There's a name for it, and it's a beautiful tree. Beautiful tree. It's beautiful for Christmas. Beautiful tree. Well, it has its look. Um, and now we have just a little grove of it left
Mm-hmm.
next to the zoo. But the pine trees that I grew up with all around me were not those. They were brought here some time ago
Mm-hmm.
from Australia.
Yep. Dirty little secret. Every pine tree in Australia that is similar to the ones that you have planted there from Australia,
Yeah.
every one of those was brought to Australia from the US.
How's that?
These pines are not native to Australia. They were brought there by settlers.
From the US?
Mm-hmm.
Wait a second. Hold on.
From the US, and there's a couple of species that also came
Wait,
from Europe. But go ahead.
wait one second, because I want to, because that's a curious. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Florida pine trees that are not native. Australian pine trees have rapidly colonized Florida's coastlines and inland
Okay.
areas, outcompeting native vegetation for resources. Da 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 da. But what about them?
Okay.
Give me 1 second here.
Australian pine.
Well, it doesn't say it. It just say it's asking to. I'm trying to find the. I mean, we're not gonna necessarily do it live, but there has to be a history of it. But to know that they were taken there, brought back here.
Yes. Okay. The Australian pine that you're talking about was brought there from New Guinea,
Okay,
Southeast Asia, and India.
okay,
Okay. I just looked that up. But
okay. That
there's all
that
kinds
clears
of
it up.
things like that. For instance, the honeybee is not native to North America. It's not native to the Americas. There is a southern version, basically, of the honeybee, the South American, but they don't come up this way. That's why they call them the European honeybee. Honeybees in North America, in the US and Canada, were all brought over from Europe.
Interesting. I have heard that before. I think you've mentioned that. It is an interesting thing. I mean, there's so many things that basically I do. Well, yeah, I'll touch on this because it's within this little thing about shipping things over and stuff. Um, I've been I've been looking at a lot of I guess they're not dialogue. What are they called? Presentations.
Hmm.
And they're in Spanish, and they deal with an issue that happens south of the border from here, all the way down to the Patagonia,
Hmm.
from Mexico all the way down to what do you call it? Argentina and Patagonia,
Hmm.
where there's a concept where Europeans, not everybody, but there's always a residual group of
Yeah.
people, just like in the United States, where they think of it, Europeans coming over,
Hmm.
as them being overtaken, um, and then being extracted of riches and such and this and that. And so there's these lectures where people break it down, like they go into nuance,
Hmm.
and books are being written, have been written on the
Hmm.
subject to really finally nail it down. Here's your example that contradicts your assumptions and so on. And I love that because it's clarifying. It may not be the clarification that one likes, but anyways, um, a lot of people have a notion that, oh, it's those people that came over and did all this junk to us and they extracted us, and that's how come X, Y, and Z is in such a crappy condition. And the arguments that these people make in very good detail, very difficult to sort of, unless you ignore the points. But the arguments made are is that the people making, like, disliking
Hmm.
or thinking, oh, it's those people over there that came over here and ruined it for us. Well, the clarification argument that's being put on the table is that no, actually, you people here are actually one and the same. Not only are you the people that were here at that one time prior to all that, but you're kind of like also the people that left from over there and came here.
Hmm.
So you're the people that you're not only are you the people that you say you were victimized, but you're also embodied in you the people that did the victimization.
Yeah. You're
So
the descendants of those people. So get over yourself.
you're the direct descendant of the people that the people over there, maybe
Hmm.
some of their ancestors may have participated and went back or whatever the case, but the people over there never set in great part never came over here, brother or
Hmm.
sister. So you're barking up the wrong frickin' tree here, and that's an
Hmm.
argument with evidence that can be clearly set. So it's a false assumption from people in living in the Americas broadly across. No, and idealistic.
Yeah. Well, it's all about that. They want something in return,
No, okay. So
even if it's just attention.
in many countries in the Americas, you know how over here, it's a gun ho for Europeanness, and people accentuate, hey,
Hmm.
no, we're European. Down there, not all, but down there,
Hmm.
it's reverse. No, 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 we don't know, not European. And if it's true, some people can't deny it. And if
Yeah.
it's true, well, it's a consequence of this terrible stuff. But we
Yeah.
were pillaged for it.
But you can't have it both ways. Is the problem? You can't have it both ways. You can't say those evil people have come to find out that they were the people responsible for you even existing.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a significant amount of people, and they were taught that
Hmm.
in the early 1800s. It was a program
Hmm.
to detach themselves from
Right
Europe.
from the during the Latin Wars of Independence. Yeah.
What ends up happening is that in order to create an identity for themselves, kind of like Americans in the United States,
Hmm.
to create an identity separate, because you need your nation to have its unique
Hmm.
identity, its own colors on the flag, its own traditions, its own legends and
Well, yeah,
folklore.
and we do that based on our historical background. I mean, if you talk to, and I've heard a couple of people from Europe visiting America who have all said the same thing, that if you ask a person, very few people identify themselves as American. They would say something along the lines of, "Oh, I'm Italian," or "I'm Irish." I do it all the time. I say, "Yeah, I'm Scottish." Things like that. They tend to identify with their heritage. We don't walk around saying to each other, "I'm American." We it's kind of a, I don't know if it's a tribal thing or what. It's only when we go overseas do we identify as American, because we think that that's something that they'll easily understand. You know.
Well, there's some of that, but if you're in a town full of Americans,
Hmm.
because there's also that the traditions in the United States, and in particular, there's a lot of like shuffling through the weeds of that. That is true in part, but there's a reason for it. If everybody is American, but if you get an American, say from South Florida, or from any other part that's not um, ethnically of the same origin, then there's a chance that they're going to, if not ponder it, but ask, well, where are you from? And you could, and this is a supposing sort of thing, but it doesn't sound unreasonable to me that it would be true. And I know there's examples of it in the past that I've run across, but um, they based on the more surface things like appearance and so on and so forth. If you don't if you don't match the consensus area, they may question that and say, well, what's going on here? Because everybody's perception of America
Well,
comes from their unique sort of location, right?
well,
If you're in
not
a big if you're in a
not
big
only that, but we more or less know, we can more or less assume that we are American. You know.
Yeah, no, but to your question of identifying,
Hmm.
American is out of the might be out of play, like you were saying. If you're in an area, like let's say you're in Boston and everybody around you is
Hmm.
Bostonian, or somewhere more isolated is a better, somewhere in the Midwest, let's say, and everybody like there the question of American is not a question because
Exactly.
unless someone has some sort of accent
Yeah.
or doesn't fit in, whether appearance, dress, whatever the case. And then the question might, now the person might. So I saw, as an example, I saw actually a few nights ago, I saw
Yeah.
a lady from either North Korea or um, some Asian country such as that, from Korea or China or something, and I forget the detail, but her family immigrated and to the United States, and she was explaining, and as she's talking, you listen to her, and she's, this is an American girl. Her parents, though, she explained, well, look, I like everything I grew up with is basically American, and so you
Hmm.
see, and she was like some sort of entrepreneur. I forget what the context of it was, but she was explaining her life experiences in terms of business, but how different that was from her parents. Her notions on freedom and so on and so forth are all American angled, simply for the fact that. But if you go, and I've mentioned this to you before, if you go one generation back, you start to
Right.
see cultural differences. And she said
Well,
that, well, my parents don't have the perspective; they have the perspective of people that immigrated
right.
um to the country and stuff, and me, so and so anyways, that's the point. So if you take a girl like that and put her somewhere, and she appears like Asian, perhaps, you know I don't know where, but let's say one of those countries, especially towards
Hmm.
further east, um unless she speaks, you know people may not know
Well,
one
that's
way or the other.
true. That's true.
And
But
that's true for anybody else, but if it's the commonplace, if you're from Northwest Europe, you might not get the same thing unless you speak and you sound English or something like that. So there's that. You can't get away from appearance.
no, you can't get away from appearance. But what I'm getting at is we don't tend to identify to one another as being American. Folks who are of Scottish descent will say, "Yeah, Scottish." Folks of German descent will say German. folks of Italian descent will say Italian.
Yeah, we already know. Like if you're
So
American, you already
yeah,
know
we
that.
already know you're American, you
Right.
know.
The
So
extra is the part.
right, exactly, and that kind of freaks some people out. It's like, wow, that's weird, you
That
know.
is a good point. It's a difference between us and over there,
Mhm.
and it's also a difference of exactly some of the points that I was making where this place is so big. If you go to a city like, so it's less, but you see the nuance I was making,
Yeah,
right?
I do, because like that, you get down in the Reno area, Reno, Nevada. There are a lot of Portuguese. There are a lot of Basque. There are a lot of Mexican and South American, Central Americans living there, and they are forever having that conversation. You can be standing there with three guys you work with. Well, you're you're Portuguese, right? No, my family's Basque. Oh, okay, okay. That is a topic of discussion.
Yeah.
They're all Americans. I mean, several generations
But
back.
where are they coming from?
But exactly, where's the heritage from?
Well,
You know.
that's one of the features of the United States, but
Mhm.
it's not one of the features of the United States alone.
No, heck no. I mean,
It's
I'm
it's one of the one. Let me get this little point. We're all clear that the United States has a lot of different. I mean, within our borders, we represent people coming from basically the rest of the world.
everywhere. Yeah.
However, there's a slight issue in the perception coming from outside looking in, where they don't assume that at first pass.
Well,
They well, go ahead.
well, most of what they've learned about America has been through American TV, movies, radio, music, things like that. And that's where they get a lot of that from. You know, um, I don't know if you've spent any time in Texas,
A little bit
but
passing by.
for someone overseas, the automatic assumption is everybody in Texas wears a cowboy hat. And that's just not the case. You might see them occasionally, but you're more likely to see a baseball cap.
Yeah.
So, but the way it's portrayed in the pop culture, everybody in Texas wears a cowboy hat. Um, everybody in America drives a huge car.
Well, let me expand on that. From the outside point of view, just like what you're saying, the perception looking towards the United States is limited
Hmm.
to their experience.
Sure.
And that experience comes in the form of TV shows and movies and such.
Right.
Um, on the ground, this is basically a sampling of all parts of the world, um, in the United States, region to region, and even within regions, you have people coming from different. And there's a long history here. I
Hmm.
mean, not as long as Europe by any stretch, but you get the point. There's a few hundred years of history here, and then some. So you have a lot of different people and whatnot, with different backgrounds. It's not readily visual from the outside looking in
No.
when you look at the United States. But what I
Yeah.
wanted to say, it's not exclusive to the United States in this
No.
following way. In this following way, from our perspective in the United States, and it's easier for me to understand it because I have a closer link. But the rest of the Americas is quite the same. The rest of the Americas it is quite the same. But our perception in the United States, not all, but I see, well, I grew up here. I know exactly what the story is. Anything south, and we have touched on this before, but I find it an important point. Anything south of the border, it's all just, let's say, Mexican or Spanish of some sort, some blurry, unknown thing. The height of ignorance that is the equivalent of thinking, and not in a negative or positive. It has its negatives and it
Hmm.
has its positives because people do what they do, but it's the same equivalent as thinking of Americans from somewhere in Europe as this one prototype of a
Right.
stamp. Everybody passed Texas going down south has as much variation, including Europe by a lot, and then some from other places by a lot, um, as much as the United States would have.
But
The only different, go ahead.
no, 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 go ahead. The only
No,
difference is what?
the only difference is that there's a tent, which is a significant tent, and that is the linguistic and historical attachment of linguistic variation to it, where you have two different empires, and it really comes down to, although you can break it down, it really comes down to, and we're the inheritors of it, of understanding and whatnot, the way we see things to a great degree, of an English and Spanish domination of the world, or conquest of the, or exploration of the world, or it really comes down to, it can even be broken down further, but for the purposes of why is everything Spanish down there, it must be all the same thing. Or even if you take them from down there and look up, they will say, oh, it's all the same thing. It's the same criteria of a limited understanding of what's across
Right.
the
Well,
way.
that's what I was saying. That their only reference for anything USA or Canada, for that matter, is what they see in the pop culture. I mean,
Yeah,
look at the stereotypes they see about Americans, but look at the stereotypes we see about Canada. I mean, when you think Canada, do you think a bunch of guys in flannel shirts wearing long johns and knitted caps and scarves, even in
I
the
don't.
house?
No,
You know,
well,
but
I think
that's
of,
but that's how it's portrayed in pop culture, is what I'm getting at.
actually, I think of I think of Greg on the
Mhm.
leaning up against a 7-Eleven with
With a
with a
Slurpee.
bucket, with a ready to fill up the bucket
Yeah,
with Slurpee.
with a bucket and a straw.
Yeah. No, I don't like I. So
But
look,
there are millions of people in this country that do, and that's what I'm getting at, because
yeah.
the only reference to Canada they have seen is what's portrayed in the popular culture,
Well,
and
there's
you miss so much.
well look, there's m- so I so there's so much there. So nobody is free of ignorance.
Hmm.
Let's just lay that out.
Yeah.
Nobody, in their own unique way, according to the things that they're not aware of,
Hmm.
free of ignorance
Oh
to
God,
one
no.
degree or the other. But no, let me get to this bit that I'm saying, and why I'm preempting it with that, because of what I'm about to say. Um, there's a video somewhere out there
Hmm.
which I found was very good because I liked it for many reasons, and I've told you about it, but I think it's applicable here. There's a video where some years back they dubbed some place in Middle America as the most racist town in America,
Hmm.
and a a group of I don't know if they were of Asian ancestry, said this is the most, according to the news, the most racist town in America. So we are going to take our cameras and we're going to see if that's true. We're going to see what that's all about, and we'll report to you if it's true or not. And they hopped in their cars and they drove out to this middle of nowhere in the Midwest place. I forget where it was. And they arrived and they did their whole shoot.
Hmm.
I'll give you the end conclusion, but then I'll tell you the one that I found deliciously hilarious
Hmm.
and yet cringy. But I'll give you the conclusion. The conclusion was that they found that people, by far, were quite nice, agreeable, welcoming, and all the good things that you could imagine in what was deemed the most racist, and back a few years, town in America.
Hmm.
So that was their conclusion as people of some Asian descent,
Hmm.
and that was their conclusion. But there's nuance in that, and so in one shot, so that was their conclusion because people
Hmm.
treated them, oh,
Yeah.
but in one of the, but that doesn't come without its pros and cons because human beings are human beings, and you're
Hmm.
going to encounter stuff like that. So this is what one of the moments on video they capture. They were at a Walmart or someplace, and on the way out, there was a lady in a wheelchair, and She says, "Oh my goodness, can I take a picture with you?" And these guys were walking out, and she was sitting in a wheelchair, maybe waiting for her ride. I don't know what. And they stopped. "Oh yeah," she says, "Yeah, I'd like a picture with you." And they all gathered for the picture. And she says, "Ah, I've never seen a I've never met a Chinaman before, a Chinaman." And
Mm-hmm.
my grandmother would just my grandmother my granddaughter would just love to see a Chinaman. I think you'll like her and stuff. She was being sweet, but her reference points in the hands of somebody pernicious would be taken wrong,
Mm-hmm.
even though all the other factors were were pleasant. Her language wasn't up to par, and in terms of, but you wouldn't know that unless you lived in a big city. I made that mistake years and years and years ago when I was a kid. I did something not like that, but I did something similar, which I cringed at immediately.
Yeah,
Um,
I think you told me about it.
yeah. So we make mistakes, we learn, and we understand because human beings. You don't call like we've talked somebody from Scotland Scotch,
Mm-hmm.
but at one point in the past that was
Yeah,
acceptable.
yeah.
But that's no longer the case because it's almost like a textile, inanimate object type
Well,
of.
Scotch is a drink. A Scot is a person. Yeah.
So there's varieties like that when so. But she was being nice. So the point is, what I'm saying is that um there's variations and people have different levels of education. Either
Well, it's
um
all subjective too. It's all subjective.
well, I I I think that you can make that argument, but and although that's true, that doesn't fly in, let's say, a court of public appeals,
And
or a court proper. You can't go, and say X, Y, and Z in a formal setting and stuff. And although that's not a formal setting, um, there are things that one is either one learns through their parents and family and society at large, or you don't. So it's a matter of education, on how you. But anyways, the usage of what you say can get you in trouble,
sure.
out of context, or with lack of understanding in a certain situation. But you could also cipher out from that scene that all she was doing was being pleasant to them, but she recognized this ancestry, and so she used the terminology that she could grab to,
That she knew. Yeah.
that she knew. They weren't offended. I think they explained that they were a little bit like, whoa, that's kind of a weird thing, but they were sophisticated enough to understand the context of, hey, we're out in the middle of this town that's supposedly the most racist town in America, according to what news source, blah blah blah,
Hmm.
and we're not saying that that's the case. This is something that's within the bounds
Hmm.
of understand. So everything within its context, but you have to have the wherewithal to see, you know, kindness and maybe a wording
Hmm.
ill placed. Um,
And one person does not make up that entire town.
yeah, no,
So,
no.
you know,
Well, no, that wasn't the only scenario they went through.
well, I'm sure it wasn't. But, they left voluntarily and, in good spirits and came to the conclusion that everybody was nice and decent and treated them well.
Yeah, they came to a conclusion that it wasn't as now in the video that they sprung them to go there.
Hmm.
They had antagonized. This is my wording, not.
Hmm.
But if you were to go through the steps that I went to, seeing all of it, you would probably use something similar or within that line. The people that went there first were sort of pushing the envelope. Somebody was getting elected or some sort of, I forget what the circumstance was, but it was kind of a political slant. And in light of the usage of a political term, like they were standing in the corner with a
Mhm.
sign that read whatever. Now, what that read was a simple saying. I think it was Black Lives Matter in this completely white town. Now, here's the thing: when that was put out like that,
Mhm.
people came over and did the deed. They said what you would expect them to say on cue, as if they were filming a film. But not everybody, but a lot of people would stop, and some people, I'm coming back, and I'm gonna get like on their trucks and stuff. Um, so he pushed the envelope to see what was under the surface, and there were people, that had X, Y, and Z proclivity, to say X, Y, and Z, because
Mhm.
that's what's there beneath the surface. It is. Some people have this thing, and this is a leftover. This is a leftover that's generational. So there is that, but there's a difference, um, between egging people, and which is his right to do. He has the right in America to stand on a corner and
Well,
have that sign.
yeah,
And
but
go ahead.
you're also only seeing what they want you to see. You're only seeing them holding the sign. What are they yelling at people that you didn't see? What other type of antagonism was going on? I'm not taking sides here. The only thing I'm going to say is if you go somewhere, and I don't care where it is, looking to pick a fight, you'll find one.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, Mark. We don't know that, and I get that point,
Mhm.
but it to me it doesn't fly. To me, to somebody else that could be reasonable. We don't know what kind of insults were going on, but the the catalog of things that were said.
I'm not making excuses for anybody, and I can probably imagine what was said.
Oh no, you could imagine it perfectly, and
But
I
my
can.
but my broader point would be if you go somewhere anywhere looking to start a fight, you will find one.
Yeah, but but in America,
Mhm.
see where you're going with that is not where I'm going with that. Although I understand what you're
Okay.
saying, and the reason I'm not going that is because at a base, as distaste now, there's qualifiers to that, but as a base, he has a right to stand in America
Sure he
in a
does.
corner and have a sign that says Black Lives Matter.
Sure he does. And I'll
And
support his
and what
right
he
100%.
and what but what he now, it is true that I don't have to like it
Mhm.
as a someone passing by, and it's true that if it's my town, that where I grew up, and now I'm seeing that and I don't like it, let's say, then I'm not gonna be too happy with that thing.
And you have every right to scream back whatever you want to scream back.
Now, right, and if one is educated, one doesn't do that. If
I
one
don't
has
know.
if
There's
one
some
has
very educated people that are some of the most racist SOBs I've ever met. I've ever
no,
had the displeasure of meeting.
but if one is no, not educated broadly. I'm talking about educated on manners. So I'm not talking about educated in a science lab. What I'm saying is a very clear thing, and people can have varieties. I could see something very distasteful, and I could have choice words. Um, but that's just me. I'm saying me, okay.
Mhm.
Because who knows what the next guy says? But I'm not looking for a fight. But maybe one day I am, and I find a fight over what somebody wants, to display, and I don't want them to display it publicly. I think that shows a lack of a bunch of stuff. I could be
I
not
agree.
liking it. I could be not liking it. Like I was making the example at the beginning, but you took me to this side road, which is a good
Mhm.
one to bring. Um, to me, in a small town, the exposure to X, Y, and Z is the equivalent of what you see on TV and such, and this and that, for Europeans looking at America, or
Sure.
for us looking at other places. And so these people are overestimating what that sign and that guy represents
Yeah,
in terms of immediate issue.
I
It's just
agree.
it's just so it's so la- barring that judgment call, and they do have the right to call out whatever they want, but it's a lack of manners. Not that you can make the same argument. Why would you want to egg on people?
Hmm.
Um, but what came from it was the go-to of racial slurs and such and this and that,
Hmm.
because behind it all, there's a media that sets up, primes the gears
Hmm.
in order to have
Hmm.
people think one thing or the other. All I'm saying is that. So at the end of the day, the original video had these guys with those signs, and I think it was Black Lives Matter, which is an abrasive thing for various reasons. But the follow up with other people, the Asian people, they went in without carrying the sign, just their bodies and persons to experience the place,
Hmm.
and they had no problem in that context. Now, whether or not, and the one lady said this thing that was in the context of
Yeah. Well,
this is the bounds of what she understands
there's ignorance everywhere. Yeah.
well, she was, that was her limit, and I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that she was negative. She was being positive. That's what she had. But they didn't go in with a sign, so there was not, who knows what people would be thinking about these Asian kids in that place.
No.
As long as they were none the wiser walking around, it's none of their business what goes on in the head between the ears, as long as what goes on in the head between the ears is not
Stays there.
infringing or infringing on your rights in a physical
That's
or
what I mean. As long
aggressive.
as it stays there.
Right. So there's a big difference there. But once you introduce antagonism, um, it is a useful thing to see what's behind like the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, because that stuff is there and it's
Well,
representative of a lack of exposure to the world and
but
understanding and so on
here's
and
my
so forth.
question: what did they expect? What did they expect? You hear this is the most racist town in the country, and we're going to do this. What did they expect?
Well,
They
to
knew
show
they knew exactly what they were going to get, and they went and they did it on purpose.
well to show exactly that, to show that people how they think.
Why? Because they knew that before they went.
Well, no, to show, no, it's perfectly reasonable. What they did was they brought the signs.
Hmm.
Well, here's the thing: the place, dude, the place is categorized as such.
Hmm.
They go there
Hmm.
to prove it or not.
And they
If
act
they put up,
surprised that that happened.
if they put up, well, nobody said that they were surprised.
Oh, okay.
You're saying they were surprised. I don't remember the video to say whether they were there to show the thing. They went there, and many things could have happened, but two things could have happened. They could have put the sign up on the corner, which they did. People passed by and not said anything. At or they could have passed by and said something. Those two things were possible. People could have said that and said, "Look at these fools." Um, some people passed by and didn't say anything. Other people passed by, backed up, and said things. Um, so they're just exposing what the ambience, what the environment, what the culture, what it is there. And so that's what they did. I don't find that, I wouldn't do that. Go and antagonize, go somewhere and antagonize people for the hell of it. That's, but they
Yeah, it's
did that. And
pointless.
no, it's not pointless. It has a point. The
It
point
is
is to,
yeah, the point is for the clicks. The point is for the attention. The point is for the media sensation. Because look, it's like me walking up to the alligator enclosure there where you worked in the Everglades and jumping in. What did I think was going to happen? Probably not anything good.
so you're calling these people So the
No,
assumption,
what I'm saying is when you go somewhere to do that on purpose, you are looking for a reaction. Because believe me, if everybody did just pass right by and not say a word, there wouldn't have been a video made. They'd have shot lots of footage, but it never would have been edited and put out.
you're assuming that.
I'm assuming that. Yes, I am.
Okay,
Because what they were looking for was a reaction, and they got it. They got to prove their point, and then they got to put it out. And I don't know how many views that video has.
the point was to prove the to prove whether or not it was true. But here's the thing too. I mean, look. Here's the thing too. In a town like Sweetwater,
Mm-hmm.
of 19,300 odd people
Yeah.
currently, those are 19,300 odd people within this town that do not all concur on the same spot over each issue,
Yeah.
nor would I even know how to begin to address.
Understood.
Okay, so with that said, you're bound to find people currently in Sweetwater, with unbeknownst to me, that would have some sort of, in this case, some sort of um, phobia against other groups of people based on race, skin color, such and this and that. You may find that, I'm not aware of it on my day-to-day experience, but I'm sure that 19,000 something people, there's going to be people with all sorts of different criteria that are that's reasonable to them. So what I'm getting at is this: in a town, a small town in the middle of nowhere, that a truck or two or X amount of trucks displays words that they used to these people based on a sign that was held up is reasonable, which is kind of what you were saying. That what would you expect in that situation? I'm just breaking it down to clarify, to
Well, I didn't say
accentuate.
anything was reasonable. I said that everybody had the right to do what they were doing. But
You
I
said
don't but I
you
don't think that it was the right thing to do on any of their sides.
you said what did they expect? So I'm working
Yeah,
on
I'm
that.
saying what did they expect?
Exactly. So that's why I'm
But I
so let
didn't but that doesn't mean I think anything is reasonable.
no, I didn't. You said what? Well, okay. So I'm not saying that you agree to it. I'm just saying that that's what.
Yeah.
Okay. So to clarify, I'm agreeing with you,
Hmm.
making a point to elaborate what you said. So I'm so
Yeah.
let me just finish saying. So they, even in a town that's small, you you're gonna find people that are disagreeable to whatever
Yeah.
message that you're pointing out.
Yeah.
That still doesn't, um because a town is an inanimate thing. It's composed of
Hmm.
people. If 100 people in a town of 99 people, like yellow doors on their front doors or bow ties on their chimneys, chances are you can say that that town sure does have a lot of bow ties in their chimneys and painted yellow doors. Um, and there's that one odd one out, you could say that. But a town in itself, just like America in itself, you understand? So we tend to simplify all sorts of stuff to get to where we're going. We all do it. The key is to check ourselves, in my opinion, or that's what I try to do, in order to avoid assuming a whole lot of stuff over a person, as opposed to what usually people end up doing is tossing a person into a group, calling that one done, because it's a simple way out to think about life, the universe, and everything. Oh yeah, all these French people. Oh yeah, all these. So all I'm saying is, so even within that, to support what you were explaining, in terms of like what did they expect? Because what did they expect requires a little bit, for me, a little bit of, and that's why I wanted to clear it up. Even with those people saying what they were saying as the guy was driving by, it's still not sufficient to say, oh, this place is riddled with racists, let's say. Even though one or two or three trucks, because the town surely has a few 100,000 or a
Yeah,
few
sure.
thousand people. So that's my point. So everything within its context. So yes, everything within its context. I'm not agreeing to it. I'm saying
No, I don't agree with it either. I mean, this is 2023. This is not, well, it's the end of 2023. It's not 1923. It's not
yeah.
1823. I think we're better than that. I think
I
we're
don't
better than that.
I don't think so.
I think we need to
I
stop
think
it.
you're better than that. I think the people out here are better than. I think many of our friends and buddies we hang out with and talk with and share stuff are better than that.
I think collectively we are better than that. And what I mean by that is there's a certain percentage of the population that is never, ever going to accept anybody but their own tribe. Never. And they're going to use that as an excuse to vent their spleens and spew all their hatred towards somebody who's not of their tribe.
Even the people that are of their tribe.
Even some of them. But yes,
No,
but
let me say, even the people
well,
that are part of their tribe are not part of their tribe.
my point in all of this is we've got to, as parents, educate out of that. We have to stop it. We have to stop picking that scab and keeping that sore alive because there's no point to it. It doesn't benefit anybody except the people who want to sensationalize it to profit from it. That's
No,
the
but
only people that benefit from it.
another way of looking at it, I don't disagree. But another way of looking at, so everything you said, I don't disagree. Um, I'm saying that sincerely, for obvious reasons, because
Mm-hmm.
anything other wouldn't make. I mean, unless you have a good argument against it, which I don't.
I don't
Personally
think there
don't think.
is one.
But to add to the thing, I kind, although that's true, that to teach the proper things. I mean, that's what our parents would do
Mm-hmm.
with us in any number of different things.
That's what my parents did with me.
Right. So, but here's the thing. You said before something that now I forgot, but most people, or a good number of people, or a sufficient number of people, sufficient to fit the criteria of what you said earlier, which was some people will never, they'll
Mm-hmm.
be part of their tribe and such. Yeah, you, that will always exist because you want protectionism
Sure.
from the outside forces that, from your vantage point, appear to be encroaching and trying to disassemble a good thing that
Well,
you
yeah,
got going.
you want defense against a threat. Well, different is not necessarily a threat.
No, no, no,
That's
but biased, but my main criteria here is the ignorance and bias part.
yeah, mine too. That's what I'm getting at. We got
The,
to
the
stop it.
the ignorance part, yeah, but it's not contained to a few people in somewhere in Middle America. The
No, you're
bias,
absolutely right. I know it isn't.
the problem with the bias is that it's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a small town,
I know
big
that,
town, whether it's in the United States.
dude. I've lived in 14 cities in 6 different states. I've traveled all over this country. I know it exists everywhere.
But let me
And
finish the
it's
okay.
got to be stopped. And the
My,
only people that can do it is us.
my greater point is that, well, no, I disagree. Well, I like the sentiment,
Mm-hmm.
but what I'm saying is it's out of it truly is out of our hands because we cannot
No, it's not
police.
out of our hands. We teach our kids and we teach our grandkids.
No, but it is out of our hand. It's out of your hands to even know the names of a handful of people that you can even pass on
Okay,
that's sitting outside of your nucleus.
but I have taken that from just me to my two kids, and they have taken that to their kids, and they have taken that hopefully to their kids, and pretty soon that minority that still thinks like that becomes completely 100% irrelevant. We need to make them the joke that they were. They are not anybody to be taken seriously, in my opinion.
No, but people can be biased out of people can be biased out of ignorance, excluding hatred.
I understand that, but that's
And
my
people
but
can.
but how
Well,
do you
let me
get
say the two
but how
bits.
do you get rid of ignorance?
Wait, but let me say the whole thing. So, well, that's another problem, which is what we're. But you can be biased minus any
Yes, you
anger,
can. You sure can.
and you can be biased plus an anger, and
Yeah,
and
100%. The minute you say you prefer blondes to redheads, you have a bias.
yeah, but
But
I don't
there's
want.
no hatred or anger involved in any of that.
Yeah, but let me please stick. Yes, that's true, but I'm not talking about. Okay, so let me address that. I really wanted to explain what I because I thought it was
No,
important.
go ahead and go
No, no,
for
but I
it. But
want to
what
explain
I'm
that because
getting
that
at,
isn't. No,
all I
because that's
was doing was it was showing you that I understood what you were trying to say
no.
about
I know you
hatred and anger.
understand. No,
Okay.
I know you understand. Like I literally know you understand.
Mhm.
But I'm bringing in the problematics, that's out of our hands. But you're that part I don't know. So I'll just say there's no escaping a preference for I like blondes, I like brunettes, I like redheads.
Mhm.
Actually, Mark, I'm gonna be serious here. You saw
He
those
says as he's laughing his butt off, I'm going to be serious here.
you saw those choices that I just threw out there.
Yes, I did.
Okay, which one do you, which one of those which one of those three do you, which one of those three do
All
you
of the
think?
above. And a few that I didn't throw in there.
So you see how that ruins everything, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Well,
okay, okay. Because
but
we
there
shouldn't have
is
got it.
another bias, but I won't say it in public.
We shouldn't have gone. We shouldn't have gone. Okay, so yes, you're right. You're right. I'm flushed. Actually, I'm
I
flushed.
know, I can see it.
Um, I got flushed. Like my ears are hot. Because I was thinking of it. It felt like. Have you ever
And,
fallen into one of those
and you should be
ball?
ashamed of what you were thinking.
Have you ever fallen? You know those play pens full of balls, and you
The
just
ball
fall in,
pit, yeah.
and you're just swimming around. Anyways, so it's like at that point you're just enjoying the whole. Um, so yes, there's no other way but to constantly discriminate. I'm using that in the lightest and broadest sense to include choosing an ice cream flavor or anything.
Sure.
We're set to make decisions across our daily experience. So that is true. And that goes
Mhm.
in all sorts of directions. But um, I guess we can't patrol the mind
No.
of others in particular. We can not even patrol our minds effectively. I can't speak for everybody, but in a general sense, one has. Um, but action is another step, bringing it into the world of reality. So, long story short, one thing is to have a nice inner exchange with that lady in that wheelchair, and I think she had a wheelchair. Maybe she wouldn't have. Um, she probably, she
Anyway, it doesn't really
she
matter.
could
I
have
mean,
she could have used the chair, um, but she didn't have any negative whatnots. She just had a lack of culturalization
mhm,
where that wouldn't where she would have known better if she were set somewhere in, I don't know,
anywhere else.
Pittsburgh,
Yeah.
or out somewhere in LA or whatnot or whatever. And another one is to go hog wild, you know, into this derogatory thing. And yes, there is the antagonism that we were talking about. So it's all set up to produce an outcome. I get that.
Mhm.
But if I were filmed and I was passing by and I didn't like the thing, I'm supposing here. But my go-to thing is, okay, that's your thing. As long as you're not burning down a building
Yeah.
or hitting an old person sitting on a in a bus stop bench with
Hmm.
a bottle like we saw 3 or 4 years ago, I'm
Hmm.
not even over that one. All
Yeah.
the things we saw, like the rest of people may have forgotten. I remember very clearly
Yeah.
every, not every, but all the burning, looting, destroying, all of it. I remember it.
Hmm.
That doesn't remove the issue of Black Lives Matter in terms of this one thing. Removing it from any political whatnots, which is not what they want. They want a political
Of
attachment. But
course.
the sheer wording that if a human being matters, yes, I don't care, and they will call this racist. Um, to say that all lives matter and such and this and that. Um, but I so on the face of that, yeah, of course, everybody matters, but you can't say that in that era, and even now, more or less, in the
Well,
improper country.
that organization has been exposed for what it really is. So that has less of a it carries a lot less weight than it did before. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they've been found, according to what I've seen. This is just from what I've seen, that they have money was used for
Yeah.
other things, not a bunch of stuff. But people, the narratives running with that whole thing in itself, the wording, I have no problem with. Of course, like, no doubt. And the reason I have
Yeah.
no doubt is because, well, let me just say this, the reason I have no doubt is because in my mind, according to everything that I grew up with, and I feel it inside of me, is that that's a human, those are human, we are all human beings, because in my belief, because I believe that we're all human beings. So in intrinsically, I have zero now. If you throw in some sort of, chicanery, shenanigans with politics and this, in order to use that as a stepping stone to the, i'm not
That's exactly what it was.
I'm not down with that, and I'm not down with that on principle as well.
Hmm.
And where there's no room for that, for that nuance, there was no room for that. Um, so yeah, I get it. But anyways, the point is that in south of the border, the same biases in different flavorings occurs when looking north to the U.S. Not
Hmm.
everybody, just like in the U.S., not everybody, but so it's a human problem, because
Hmm.
the less we know, the more of those things can persist. The less exposure we have to, the more that the more bias can exist. It's not a feature alone within our borders, and even then, it's a small grouping of people that who knows where the hell, regardless of whether more people would think in one way or the other. That can't be helped because we're human beings. You can't control the mind. So all I was saying is that it's everywhere. It comes from Europe looking in, it comes from the United States looking out, it comes from South America looking over, it comes from Canada looking, and it's a human problem because of that you said from the beginning, the tribalism thing.
Hmm.
It's just simply something that I don't see easy to overcome, because there's too many people that think the way they want to think, and we have no access to that.
No, but that's why you marginalize those people. You marginalize them. You make them the punchline. You know, me as one person, all I can do is teach my kids properly, and then all they can do is teach their kids properly, and all Linda could do was teach her kids properly. That's all. As one person, that's all we could do.
Harneal said something there addressed to me. Can you bring it up? I
Yeah.
haven't read it.
Hey, you're showing your bias that people in cities are more sophisticated than co-op country folk.
Well, no, I don't think that that's the case. I was using the so the reason I said that is, and by the way, all my family came from the country in Cuba, the country.
Mhm.
And you can't get more country the equivalent of country folk. My family, sure they have, but that didn't mean that they lacked manners.
Yeah,
They were educated.
and that's what I'm. You said something about exposure. You can be a decent human being without exposure.
Right. Well, but the reason I brought that up is that
Hmm.
what's the tendency in a big city, right?
Hmm.
Except that you will learn fast if you're coming to the big city
Hmm.
from the country, and you might, whether you, and let's say you have the same leanings that that lady did, which was lack of exposure. You will quickly be exposed, or you will quickly have exposure to all sorts of different stuff, from culinary to everyday whatnots. And if you don't learn that certain ways of interacting are incorrect, then you're just not a functional human being, because you don't go to Rome and call Romans a bunch of sissies. You don't go to frickin' Germany and call them a bunch of, I don't want to say the word.
Yeah, New York City is so well known for its polite people.
No. So so you're not going to.
I think that's proximity disease, personally, Steve. It's just
Yeah, but
that there are so many packed in such a small area, they shoot one another just to pass the time, you know?
most, so look, my point is completely solid. It's unmistakable. I'm not
And,
saying everybody in New York City. So number one, there's more people in New York. You're
mhm.
gonna find bad people. There's less people in somewhere in the country. You're gonna find less, um, population wise, bad people. But in the country, a couple of bad apples will stain the whole barrel, because there's just less of, and the impact in context is right there. In the city, yeah, you can have millions of people, and there can be a bunch of bad actors. But, well, let's put it this way: you're gonna find bad people, but my point is, you don't go from a small town and to a big city without being changed. Not only because you're in a big city, but because there's certain things when it comes to this topic that you just don't go and say in front of a person of said ethnicity. You don't do it unless you're willing to take out your nunchucks and have a fisticuffs. And I don't think that late. So that's kind of where my point is. I'm not saying that the city is paradise and the country is not. I'm not saying that they're better. I'm just saying the context and the exposure to people that you're not in contact with
And
originally will change your approach. And in so doing, you're going to learn a few things as well. And when you
it'll
go back to the country, you might have a few things like, oh, by the way, in the big city, or when I went to Paris, and you don't call Parisians this, and you don't. That's how people function. I don't think that may. I think that I'm pretty much on solid ground. No,
it doesn't change the way people think. It will change the way people present themselves. And it may change the way people interact with other folks.
that's it.
But it doesn't necessarily change the way a person thinks. It
No,
could. It
oh
might.
no, oh no. It'll. I would make the argument that when I went to California, it changed my perception of the culture out there, Mexican culture out there. I was exposed to it. I wasn't exposed to it here in Miami. Now
Okay.
now existed after California. Notice how solid this is. I don't think that, but go ahead. Not you, but anybody. Um, Pre California, Eloy had all this information in his computer, minus the details that he learned when he was in California. When he returned from California, Eloy now added X, Y, and Z. Whether I found those X, Y, and Z's preferable, positive, or not preferable and negative, that's another story. But in a conversation with someone else, yourself, I will deliver to you the things I learned in the context that I learned them. If you go back to your hometown after going somewhere like, I don't know, Texas, I don't know, Chicago, and you didn't learn jack squat from your experience, well, that speaks for itself.
Well,
There is
that's
a
what I'm getting at. That's exactly what I'm getting at. They may not change their thinking, but they will change the way they present themselves. So they're not getting in fist fights every time they turn a corner. You know,
yeah. I don't know. I think it's like
somebody who's biased is probably going to stay biased. They may change. They may have their minds changed. They may have their hearts changed. But there's an equal chance that they won't. And once they leave that area and go right back to the same way of thinking, the only thing they got was a little bit more experience and they tried some different food. I've known people like that, believe me. I've known people who would smile at you and be the nicest person in the world. But the minute you got behind closed doors, it was, oh man, this and oh man, that. And it's like, you're a real asshole. You know that?
there's also another, on a side note, similar to, as far as people what they think or what they don't think, and all this and that. And I was pondering this recently,
Yeah.
but I forget the context right now. But it kind of fits in with all this in terms of the mind and whatnot. Um, when I don't know the context of what I was saying it originally, but it kind of worked at the time. I can't even put it together right now, but I'm gonna put it together in the context of this and see what comes out. um, when people when people say something to the effect of, okay, I'll say it like this: when somebody does good things
Mm-hmm.
or positive things or beneficial things or good deeds,
Mm-hmm.
and people are seeing a person doing good deeds, um, people to whatever degree will say, well, hell, this person is doing good deeds, and that's good because good deeds are good.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, well, so that's a good deed, and boy, this person has these characteristics and whatnot that are good, that are positive characters. A section of people may, we don't know what's inside people's heads, but they may, I could see this as a possibility. And actually, I've seen examples that I can't bring up now but may think, well, yeah, they may be doing good things outwardly. Yeah, that person may have taken that food to that soup kitchen, and we see that outwardly. And that person may have helped that family on the side of the road outwardly, but we don't know that I'm suspicious, that internal. Now, here's the thing: I was thinking something in terms of all that. It doesn't frickin' matter, this internally bit, to the observer, that person that's suspicious and stuff, glass half empty. What matters is the actions of the person, the behavior of the way they comport themselves, the actions that they take. And I further thought, because the mind is a terrible thing, because you could be a grumpy old son of a gun. You could be a grumpy old, and this goes to kind of like what Steve was saying. I'm not oblivious to what the concept is. I don't know why Steve took it that way, because I'm quite prepared to accept that notion that he said, and then some. I have no issue with that criteria. But you could be a grumpy son of a gun, and you're driving down a lone highway and see a family with a tire blown. And even though you're a grumpy son of a gun, you stop because there's that part of you. I've seen that happen. And you get out, grumpy ass son of a gun, and you change that tire. And you're off on your way, and you keep going with your grumpy ass self. and you're so not one thing follows the other necessarily, and that's very true. And there's variations in everything. But I was thinking, one can be a son of a gun internally, because the mind is a treacherous thing at times, and still do the right thing, force or direct yourself to do the right thing. And that's may not be all that matters, because there's an internal world, but behavior towards others, I think, cancels out sufficiently people that are on about that. Yeah, they may be behaving nicely.
I don't need to pay
They,
attention to those kind of people.
but those people do exist, and so there's a sort
Well,
of this and
they people of all branches of the spectrum exist. I mean, and
when
I don't give
someone's
a
nice
damn
to you,
about them.
no, but when someone's nice to you, when you're nice to someone,
Hmm.
basically, when you show a gesture to me, like
Hmm.
us in our friendship, um, you're being nice to me.
Hmm.
I'm not questioning your niceness.
Right.
But then again, we're friends,
Hmm.
so that's different. I guess maybe I shouldn't have brought that. So, but if it's a stranger
Hmm.
and they do something nice, I accept it at face value.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, you do have to be gracious and thank the person. You do.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
you do need to appreciate when a kindness is done to you.
Exactly.
And
You can't
believe
be
me, I am.
right. And
Believe
so
me.
and so with that, the problem is second guessing what other people may or may not think in their heads.
Well, personally, I think whatever you're thinking in your head is none of my business. But that's
Yeah.
something else that I was taught. So if I see you pull over to help somebody change a tire, good for you. Thank
Yeah,
you for doing it.
that's just a good deed done by a
Yeah.
person
And that's
and
it. What's
right.
going on in your head is none of my business.
A person can be well the last thing that I'll say on all this so that we I guess we'll be heading out the door but I just wanted to say this thing the reason I we I took us in this direction in this little way is because a lot of the people that I hate I don't want to I'm gonna jump to conclusions real quick but I know I'm doing it so I know there's more nuance the people that went hog wild under as using that slogan as a stepping stone years back and went hog wild to burning and a looting and a jumping and a hopping and a destroying and a beating and a slashing and a this within that whole mayhem there people that did not participate they may have felt sincerely about that slogan let's say in itself as a thing without the context of taking an opportunity to steal and loot and rob stuff which I'm really I really dislike and hope that that's remembered coming up with this election. I'll freaking say it. But with all that, there's people that may have that kindness that they think of it in its pure sense. We can't know what everybody's thinking individually, but that kind of outward action, as opposed to fixing a tire, um, tells you all you need to know because it's this side of composure and not hurting others. So they're practicing not what they're preaching. They're practicing looting, burning, and it's as obvious as a sore thumb. The actions speak louder than the words, is what I'm getting at. And so they're no one to talk about what other people think that are sitting in a cafe, and just because of a perceived coloration on their body, they are to kneel or submit to a slogan like I saw being done. I remember all of that stuff. So there's distastefulness. You can use it for your ends and means and such. The whole thing is disgusting. So, yeah, I'll just say that. Although that was quite the mouthful, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, time to land the plane.
All right. So, folks, we hope you enjoy the next new year because, oh boy, it sure is running up on us. We're the Trampled Underfoot podcast show. Your hosts are Mark Lindsay and Eloy Escajedo. We go live every Tuesday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time. We have a site over on Facebook, Trampled Underfoot Podcast on Facebook. And we also have a website, trampledunderfootpodcast.com. We are also sponsored by
Arneal Media, your web solution. He hates it when I do that. That's okay. That's why I do it. You find the soft spot, you find the ticklish spot on the underbelly, and you just get the stick, step. But in all seriousness, Harneal Media, I'm telling you, Steve is the man, the myth, and the legend. He knows what he's doing. He does it very well. I still don't know how he does about half of it because the guy is everywhere all at once. If you're thinking about a website, and you should be, if you're thinking about a web store, and you should be, there is nobody else I would talk to but Steve over at Harneal Media. There's a link to Harneal Media in every episode on this YouTube channel. I'm proud to call him a friend, and I'm proud to say he's the sponsor of TrampledUnderfootPodcast.com. So check him out. He's very competitively priced, 100% personalized service. When you're dealing with Harneal Media, you're dealing with Steve. So go deal with Steve. He's good people. Tell him I sent you. That's Harneal Media, HARNEAL media.com, sponsor of TrampledUnderfootPodcast.com.
Dude. I'm glad that you went because I had to quickly, because if not, I would explode.
I'm so glad we had this time together.
I was listening for the cue, and I was
have
saying,
a laugh or sing a song.
I was quickly, and it sounds like he's finishing. It's
tying the knot.
Okay, everybody, listen. Go ahead.
Happy New Year, everybody, and hope to see you next year.
Peace.
There it is. There's the camera.